Hey, everybody, welcome. Glad that you're here with us tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. I hope you're all enjoying the summertime. It is lovely weather in New York. For a while, it was super hot, and then it was not super cold, but it was a little chilly. But now it seems to be in just the perfect spot. Was out in the city filming a little bit today, and yeah, all is well. So let's have yet another great late night chat.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're having yet another great late night chat. Just a reminder of how we do these streams. The format is first I give my opening remarks, which is whatever I'm planning to talk about. Then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you. We find out who is on the other side of the camera, who's watching. Then after that, I answer people's questions for the remainder of the night. And often people have very, very good questions. The second half of our show can often be quite exciting because I just answer and respond to people off the cuff. So if you got something for me to talk about in the second half of the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. That is the best way to send your question. Now, there are other ways to do it. There are other ways. You can also super chat because we're monetized again, right? YouTube monetized us once again. And that's good. So you can super chat. You can do a Rumble rant. You can cash at me, however you want to do it. But the best way is buy me a coffee. That's the best way. It's very straightforward, very basic. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. In terms of announcements, we just have one big announcement, I guess, which is that the August 15th National Convention of the Center for Political Innovation is approaching. Now, it's part of 7 days of activities that our members are involved in. We're having our national 7-day program, but the big day is August 15th in Chicago. And it's going to be quite a big day. We're getting all the arrangements in order and figuring everything out and raising money and making calls, and people are coming to town. So if you would like to come to the convention, please register. The link is down below in the description. It's also here in the chat. Just dropped it into the chat. I'm putting it on the Rumble as well. Please register for the convention. It's going to be a great day in Chicago. And, the day before, we're having a France out of Africa rally. We're having the 7-day program. People will be in town doing all kinds of great stuff. It's all very, very good. I actually did just publish an article on the CPI website about kind of the mission of the convention and 7-day program and how we need an axis of resistance within the midterm elections. So maybe you want to check that out as well, dropping that in the chat, just kind of about our orientation. We are the Center for Political Innovation, and we are building a movement. We are building a movement, and we are organizing, because the only thing that's going to get us out of this crisis is a real anti-imperialist movement. That's what we need more than ever. The Center for Political Innovation is the organization that we are building here. We're all about it. And I guess we can just put on, this short kind of video clip of shows some of the stuff we do around the country. And then we'll go from there. So, yeah, this is us, CPI. right, that's us, CPI, the Center for Political Innovation. Dare to struggle, dare to win. We're heading towards our national convention in Chicago. It is going to be absolutely tremendous. The registration link is down below. I'll drop it in the chat one more time. Get involved. The point is not simply to analyze the world. The point, however, is to change it. We are building a movement. So that's the Center for Political Innovation. Check us out and get involved. We need an anti-imperialist movement in this country more than anything. But anyway, tonight, I guess just to remind you one more time, we're following our usual format. First, the opening remarks, then the roll call, and then I answer your questions. So if you have a question for the second half of the show, send it as a Rumble rant, Cash App. You can do a super chat. You can go to buymeacoffee.com. So yeah, just send your questions. So, all right. So now we're going to get into the show for tonight. Tonight, I decided I would do a slideshow. And the reason I decided to do tonight's slideshow, give it the title that it's got, is because I've noticed amid the internet having this big, dumb argument about communism, I've noticed that nobody seems to know anything about economics. And it's frustrating because a lot of conservatives believe they are experts on economics because they've taken kind of basic, Econ 101. They've learned about supply and demand. And a lot of leftists refuse to ever discuss economics because of the fact that, it's not trendy. A lot of leftists just want to talk about identity politics. They want to talk about sexual issues and sexual groups. And they want to talk about who's got privilege. And they don't really want to talk about economics. And if you're talking about socialism or communism in America, immediately people, first of all, think you're having an argument about making everyone equal, first of all. And second of all, everyone immediately wants to talk to you about, the so-called failure of socialism and communism. Now, we are innovationists because we have a higher understanding. But that understanding, is what we're going to get into tonight. So tonight's slideshow is, I gave it a title, a provocative title. So we'll just pull it up here. And the title itself kind of points to the, what it's about. Tonight's slideshow is, it's processing. Here we go. Economics is not hard to understand because it's really not. And they work really, really hard to make you think that economics is too complicated for you to understand, right? It's, oh my goodness, when they start talking about economics, I know nothing about economics. I don't understand it. No, economics is really not that hard to understand. And it is the basis of so much. Politics is just kind of a charade in which underlying it all is economics. And, if you don't have an economic understanding, you're not going to be able to really understand politics. A lot of things in the world are not going to make sense to you. Economics is very, very important to understand. And so tonight I am going to explain economics with 8 principles, 8 facts, 8 points, I guess, that if you understand these 8 points, you understand everything you really need to know about economics. So we're just going to go through these 8 points one by one. Principle number 1, growth defines humanity. What does it mean to be human? Human beings are the only species that forces the environment to serve them and constantly reinvents its relationship with nature in order to expand its life expectancy, expand its population, expand its living standards. No other species is capable of mastering the environment and rising to a higher plane of existence in the way human beings can. There is not one. There is not one other species that has multiplied its population the way human beings have. There's not one other species that has reinvented the way it interacts with its environment the way human beings have. There is something unique about human beings. And you find this both in the Abrahamic religions and you find this in Marxist philosophy. In the book of Genesis, which is generally acknowledged by Christians, Muslims, and Jews to be the foundation of their belief system. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 28 says, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth on the earth. So basically, in the foundation of the Abrahamic faith, it's taught that human beings master their environment and force the environment to serve them. They have dominion over the environment. That's what defines humanity. Friedrich Engels, one of the founders of Marxism, a collaborator of Karl Marx, he said the exact same thing in an essay that he wrote. He said, quote, "The animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends and masters it." And this is the final essential distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction. Labor, work, is human beings asserting mastery over their environment and forcing the environment to serve them. And humans have been constantly reinventing their relationship with nature and remastering the environment in different ways. And as a result, we live longer, we expand our population, we expand our life expectancy, we have a much more comfortable life than we once had. No other species is capable of this. This is what defines humanity. And that's the basis of economics, because it is that relationship between man and his environment that is what economics is. Principle number 2, you cannot cut your way into real growth. Now, this is an important point. It seems like basic mathematics. If I have 2 apples and I take one of the apples away and I have only 1 apple left, I have less than I started out with. 1 apple is less than 2 apples. However, one thing that people do not seem to understand is that if you have less, you can't have more. And for some reason, many of the bad ideas people have about economics are founded on this belief that somehow we can have less and we'll have more. Doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. If you have less, you have less. Now, if you have less in the short term, it might bring some economic relief. It might stabilize things. But in the long term, if you have less, you're not going to have economic growth. And austerity is a school of economics that says if we cut government services out of the economy, we cut the jobs of government workers, we cut food stamps, we cut assistance to low-income people. If we do that, then we have more. Well, it doesn't work that way. If you do that, and the wages that were paid out to government employees are no longer paid out in the economy, and they no longer have that spending power, you have less. If you cut food assistance to low-income people, and as a result, they're not able to spend on food like they once were, then the food companies have less and sell less, and you have less. That generally, you cannot cut your way into economic growth. It might seem great in the short term, right? You might be able to reduce taxes or something like that. But in the long term, if you reduce the amount that there is, the amount of money circulating, you have less. In addition to that, there are various, in addition to, like libertarian degrowth ideas, the idea we just get the government out of the way, right? We just cut government spending out of the economy and we'll have more. That doesn't work, right? That if you cut the jobs of government employees, if you cut subsidies into the economy, you cut government spending, you have less. You don't have more. The other thing that is important to remember is that there are various other forms of degrowth that are not austerity. They're not just getting the government out. They're like government-controlled degrowth. And there's many different government-controlled degrowth programs. The right in economics, the American right wing, tends to push austerity, the idea the government just cuts spending, and somehow that will create economic growth. It doesn't work like that. The left tends to push government-controlled degrowth, state-controlled degrowth, where the government gets more involved in the economy, but it does so in order to have less. The Green New Deal is a great example of that. The Green New Deal wants to reduce the amount of energy that is produced in the United States, and it wants to replace, fossil fuel power plants with coal, not with coal, but with windmills and solar panels. And as a result, there's less energy, right? Windmills and solar panels produce a lot less energy than coal power plants do, right? If you want to get off of fossil fuels, go to nuclear power. Get fusion energy, advance into fusion energy. But if you reduce the amount of energy that is going out in the economy, as a result, society is going to get poorer. You cannot have real economic growth. There's a lot of different forms of government-controlled degrowth, and some of them are quite sneaky. One of them that I've talked about many times is what they call the National Service Initiative. This is something that has been pushed many times by Democrats mainly, and every time it just doesn't go anywhere. People don't like it. The idea is that after college, every American will be required to, or every young American before college, after they graduate high school, will be required to do the jobs, will be required to go into the military. And they'll go into the military, or if they don't go into the military, they'll do 2 years of national service. And that sounds great, right? Young people either serve their country in the military or they serve in national service, cleaning the parks and, working. Well, what it actually means, though, is that young people will do the job of government workers for free. And government workers will be replaced by young people that are doing their national service. And instead of paying people good salaries with public sector unions to go clean the streets, we have 20-year-olds doing it for free as their national service, and they don't get any benefits. Teach for America, the Teach for America program is put forward by Obama. Sounds great, right? If you'll go teach in a low-income area, we'll forgive some of your student debt. Well, what they don't tell you is that if they send you to go teach in a low-income area, you're taking a job away from a teacher that is paid a full salary with a union contract and benefits. And you are doing for almost minimum wage the job that a union teacher would do as a contracted public employee, right? And there's many forms of this. One, really sneaky form of austerity, government-controlled austerity, is a guaranteed minimum income. This has been put forward many times. The idea that instead of having food stamps and instead of having, Section 8 for low income people, instead of having unemployment insurance, instead of having that, what we'll do is we'll just cut every American a check for $1,000 every month. Everyone just gets $1,000 free money in their bank account every month. Well, that sounds great, right? I mean, a basic income, right? So that everyone has like a little bit of a basic income, except there's a problem with that. It sounds great. Everyone gets $1,000, and maybe a lot of people weren't getting government assistance before, but you're getting rid of all the government employees that administer food stamps. All the people who work for the Department of Agriculture running the food stamps program are all laid off. You get rid of all the people at the Department of Labor who run the unemployment insurance program and Social Security. You get rid of all the people in the Housing and Urban Development Department that administers Section 8 and low-income people's assistance with rent, right? You get rid of all of those employees that are all getting paid good salaries. And instead, everyone just gets an automatic bank deposit for $1,000 every month. Well, then that's degrowth. Then you're having less money go into the economy. And as a result, society gets poorer overall. But it sounds great, right? Everyone gets $1,000. But if it means at the same time you get rid of all social programs, then you have created a big problem. And that there's many, many versions of this, right? In the name of environmentalism, they say, well, we're going to use less energy, right? That's a really common one, right? We're using too much energy. No, we're not using too much energy. We need to develop more efficient and higher energy sources. We need to get beyond fossil fuels. But the idea that we're going to solve climate change by just using less energy, which is what the environmental movement largely promotes. We're just going to reduce energy output. That is going to make society poorer overall, right? You cannot make society wealthier. You cannot have real economic growth by cutting. If you have less, you can't have more. That's not how these things work. If the amount of energy being used decreases, if the amount of government spending goes down, if you are forcing people to have less and to take lower wages, etc., society gets poorer. You cannot cut your way into growth. Principle number 4, right? This is in order. This should be principle number 3. Okay, principle number 4. Capitalism has an unnatural problem, right? Every society that has ever existed in history has had an economy. Hunter-gatherer civilization, the economy was very simple. People went out and they hunted and they gathered. and they hunted for animals and killed them, and they gathered fruits and nuts and plants and ate them. That was pretty simple. Out of hunter-gatherer civilization, we got slavery, and slavery's economy was based on farming and the origin of agriculture, people growing their own crops, people domesticating animals. And in the stage of agriculture, and I mean, in that stage of development, in slavery and feudalism, the economy was more complex, and you had serfs and landowners, slaves, masters, etc. Right? And that economy is about interacting with the environment. It wasn't until the capitalist mode of production fully got going in 1825 that we saw a problem that had never existed before. All through human history, until 1825, if there was a famine when people starved, that famine was caused by a shortage of food. All through human history, until about 1825, if there was a mass episode of homelessness, it was caused by there being a shortage of housing. But starting in 1825 and recurring every few years since then, there became cyclical economic crises that seemed completely irrational. Poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty. Abundance and wealth became the source of economic suffering. And this problem of overproduction, it's generally called glut by economists. You can Google it. That the market becomes saturated with goods that cannot be sold. The price of the goods drops to the point that they're not profitable anymore. And businesses close down, and people lose their jobs, and people become homeless because there are too many houses. And people become hungry because there is too much food. This is a problem that has never existed before, but it is a recurring problem in the capitalist mode of production. And poverty amid plenty, glut, is a problem that hangs over the capitalist economy like a curse. And I guess often I have a video I've done on this called Socialist Math, but I think I'll just break the math down again for you on this stream, right? Poverty amid plenty is caused by this basic problem with the capitalist market. Let's say that you're making tires, right? You have a factory where you're making tires. In order to make the tires, you're going to need the materials, the rubber, the supplies to make the tires. The supplies, the materials, that will be A. We'll call that A. That's the materials that it's going to cost to make the tires. We'll call that A. And you're going to need to transport the tires to where they're being sold. So that is B. Right? And on top of that, you're going to need workers, human labor power, to assemble the tires. So that is C. And the final cost is D. Now, there's a problem with that, which is the employer who put up the money has to make a profit. He has to get a return on his investment. Well, he cannot change how much the tires materials costs, and he cannot change how much the shipping costs. So the only value he's able to cut into is the value put in by the labor. And this is when people talk about exploitation, right? That the profit, the value that the profit that is extracted as profit by the employer is extracted from the labor put into it by the worker, right? That's you actually, C1 is what the employee actually gets paid, and C2 is the profit extracted by the capitalist. Now, that's unfair, right? The worker is not getting paid the full value of what they produce. The capitalist is taking surplus value from it. And that's where a lot of people that talk about Marxism on the internet stop. Well, they're missing the point, though, because people say, okay, but what about the employer? He put up the money. There would not be a factory if it wasn't for him. Doesn't he deserve to get a return on investment? You're missing the point. It's not about it not being fair. The main problem, though, is this. C1 is the wages that are being paid out. C1 can never be greater than D. C1 will always be less than D. There are never enough wages paid out in the process of production to purchase the product. There is never enough wages put out into the economy in order to buy the amount of product that is produced. As long as you have production organized to make a profit, there are more products going out than there are wages being paid out. And this is a really big problem in the capitalist mode of production, is that there's always more product than wages. And eventually this evens out, right? You might say, okay, well, an individual worker doesn't have to buy all the tires he makes. That's not the point. It evens out over the course of an economy. There's always more product produced than there are wages paid out. The wages that are going into the economy from production are never enough to buy back the products that are produced. And that's why you have the constant problem of glut. And the problem of glut gets worse because of labor-saving technology, right? The capitalist is competing with other capitalists. He wants to produce as many tires as he possibly can. He wants to pay as little as he possibly can to do it. And as technology advances, fewer and fewer workers are hired, and then the purchasing power of the worker goes down even further. But the productive capacity, the ability to produce tires, goes higher and higher. So you're getting more and more tires, and you're getting fewer and fewer wages paid out in the process. And then there's another problem, which is one of the main ways that the capitalist reduces labor costs is with labor-saving technology, right? He wants to hire fewer workers. He replaces workers with machines. However, only the labor power is where he can extract his profits. And so if C decreases, right? You have C, which is the labor value that goes into it. If C decreases, C2 also decreases, right? As the human labor power involved in production goes down, the rate of profit, the amount of profit that the employer can make on each item he sells, also decreases. So the more technology advances, the more of a problem you have. And the US government, if you don't believe me, I have people who insist that this can't be true, Caleb. Every time I explain this, there's 3 or 4 people in the chat who say, oh, well, why don't you just make the materials cost less? That's not how it works. We're talking about the value, right? There's always people who don't get this. And I explain this night after night after night. And every time I explain it, there's some wise guy in the chat who says, yeah, we'll just make the shipping cost less and give the money to the worker. No, that's not how it works, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the value put into it, right? And there's a lot of people who just really try hard not to understand this. But here we go, right? This problem is always there. And if you don't believe that this problem exists, I would encourage you, and I've talked about this on these streams, but we're just going to document it tonight. There is a cheese cave in Springfield, Missouri, right? Google cheese cave in Springfield, Missouri. If you do not believe me, Google cheese cave in Springfield, Missouri, right? There is a cave in Springfield, Missouri, where the US government buys cheese and buries it in order to keep the price of food high. This is a fact. There is a cave and set up by the Department of Agriculture where the US government buys cheese and buries it in order to keep the cost of cheese and dairy high enough that farms don't go out of business. And that's not the only thing that the U.S. Department of Agriculture spends money on. There are all kinds of mechanisms that have been invented. And it's funny, I'm Googling this and there are people trying to say that it's an urban legend. It's not an urban legend. You click on it, it's very, very true, right? The U.S. government, U.S. Department of Agriculture buys food and buries it in order to keep the prices high. Right? This is routine, right? And since 1935, the US government has been purchasing food items and destroying them in order to keep the price high, right? The U.S. Department of Agriculture buys $263 million in dairy and specialty crops just to keep the price high. And it's to deal with the fact that it's very, very efficient to produce cheese. And so if the government wasn't spending millions of dollars to buy dairy products, all the farms would go out of business because it's cheaper to produce cheese than it is to sell it. And that there's all kinds of issues with this. And the capitalist economy constantly has this problem of glut. It's an unnatural problem, the problem of overproduction. And starting in 1825, when the industrial capitalist economy of Europe was fully in swing, every couple of years, you would have what they called a panic or a stock market crash, where the market would be saturated with products. And as a result, all the workers would lose their jobs and the economy would come to a grinding halt and people would be starving and desperate. And then it got to the point that people were starving and desperate enough and the prices dropped and then the economy would start to come back, right? And it's a completely outrageous problem. I think I've got some quotes about this problem I can put on the screen. But this is one of the problems that is inherent. When you have production organized for profit, you will have this problem. And it's a problem that is widely acknowledged. John Maynard Keynes, who's one of the most respected economists, he called the problem underconsumption. Karl Marx, the critic of capitalism, he called it overproduction. But it's the same thing, right? This is the Communist Manifesto, right? In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. All right, what does Marx go on to say? Says, the conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other hand, by the conquest of new markets and the more thorough exploitation of old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises. All right? And this is the main critique of capitalism that is out there. And it predates Marx, long before Marx. Fourier was saying this. Robert Owen was saying this. This is the problem. This is Frederick Engels explaining the problem. The whole mechanism of the capitalist mode of production breaks down under the pressure of productive forces, its own creations. It's no longer able to turn all the mass of means of production into capital. They lie fallow. And for that very reason, the Industrial Reserve Army must lie fallow. Means of production, means of subsistence, available to laborers, all the elements of production and general wealth are present in abundance. But abundance becomes the source of distress and want. But because it's efficient to produce wealth, and because we're producing wealth efficiently, people become homeless and lose their jobs and the economy breaks down. This is a completely unnatural problem that only exists in the capitalist mode of production. And there are many ways of explaining it. There's the coal miner's riddle. The coal miner's riddle. The story goes, the little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." The little boy says, "Why can we not afford any coal to heat the stove?" He says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I've been laid off." He says, "Why did you lose your job at the coal mine? Why have you been laid off?" He says, "Because there is too much coal." And in fact, if you don't believe me, you can hear about it from a U.S. Army general. All right, if you think I made this up, ask General Dean. This is General Dean. This is the only U.S. Army general ever to be taken prisoner. He was taken prisoner during the Korean War. General Dean. And this is his autobiography, which I read. And he describes what it's like to be held by the North Koreans and, what it was like to be held by the North Koreans. And in the process of being held by the North Koreans tried to convert him to communism. And General Dean explained what he learned from the North Koreans. He says, quote, "Another point is that through labor unions, American workers complain about and fight against labor-saving devices because they put men out of work. Under communism," runs the theme, "because they runs the theme, everyone tries to devise labor-saving equipment because there will be work available for all at all times. In the beginning, everyone will have to work harder than he would like and long hours, but it will all come out right in the end with everyone's labor planned, no duplication, no human being working for an individual rather than for society as a whole. There won't be excessive hours of labor, and each will receive his requirements. So if you think that I just made this up, oh, there's no such problem, ask General Dean about it. When the North Koreans held him prisoner, they discussed this with him at great length, and he said that there were many convincing arguments that the communists had when they held him. And when the North Koreans held General Dean, they explained to him that in America, labor unions are desperately trying to stop labor-saving technology. In North Korea, workers and labor unions are constantly trying to invent new labor-saving technology, right? That capitalism has this problem of poverty created by abundance and technological advancement leading to economic problems, and it's an unnatural problem. This is General Dean, a U.S. Army general captured by the North Koreans, explaining this problem. This is the critique of capitalism. None of the people on the internet, on the left or the right, that are arguing about communism right now have ever heard of any of that, right? Even though Marx spent his whole life writing about this, I just showed you it's in the Communist Manifesto. None of them ever know about this. People on the internet think communism and the critique of capitalism is that in capitalism, people have more money than others, and it's unfair, and that's no fair. And they don't understand that, no, capitalism has this problem that as technology advances, society becomes more and more unstable, and that the capitalist economy breaks down under technological advancement. That's the problem. Self-driving cars are hanging over our economy right now as a curse. It's only a matter of time before we get cars that can drive themselves. And that should be a great thing. But in our highly irrational economic system, self-driving cars would mean all the Uber drivers out of work, all of the taxi drivers, truck drivers out of work, all the traffic court employees out of work. It would be a disaster. And it would take a really long time for our economy and our society to go back to normal if they got rid of driving, if driving was no longer necessary. Why is that rational? That is this problem that capitalism has. Abundance creates poverty, poverty amid plenty, glut, overproduction, value crisis, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. That is an unnatural problem. And all of economics, the entire school of economics, is dedicated to trying to fix this. John Maynard Keynes spent his entire career explaining that we need the government to spend money in order to stabilize the economy, in order to avoid this, right? The Austrian school, the libertarians, they bend over backwards to try and show that this doesn't happen, that this is only created by the government. They try to deny it. But nobody who's arguing about communism on the internet now even knows about this. Whenever I talk to libertarians, they don't even understand what I'm saying. They're saying, so you're saying technology is bad? No, I'm not saying technology is bad. I'm saying technology should be good, but we have a highly irrational economic system that has this built-in problem that your Austrian school economists spent their whole life trying to disprove and couldn't disprove, that John Maynard Keynes spent his whole life explaining that we can have the government spend money to resolve, that this is something that is widely understood. The term glut, right? Just Google the word glut, G-L-U-T, glut, right? Just Google it. Google the word glut. See what comes up. It is an excessive supply or overabundance of something. It's one of the biggest points and biggest problems of the economic system of production for profit. And yet no one seems to know that it exists, right? And it's really, really important in light of artificial intelligence. And we'll get to that later. The principle number 5, the world is ruled by Western monopolies. All right, great example. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our country, he wrote a lot about how America would be a country of what he called yeomen. Have you ever heard this? This is a big theme in Thomas Jefferson's writings, that America will be a country where we won't have rich and we won't have poor. Everyone will just have their own little farm. Everyone will have their own little farm and farm their own farm and take care of themselves. We'll have a country of yeomen. That sounds great, doesn't it? A country of yeomen. Everyone just has their own little farm, and they take care of themselves and they mind their own business, and no one tells anybody else, how to live their life, and everyone gets to live his life as they wish, and and no one bothers anybody else, etc. That's the yeoman theory of Thomas Jefferson. Well, here's the problem, right? So let's say you have a country of yeomen, right? Let's say that there's an area where you have 40 different small farmers that all have their own land. They don't have any slaves. They don't have any servants, employees. They just have their own land and they farm it. What happens when there's a drought? There's a drought. A big chunk of those farmers are not going to produce any crops, and they're going to go under. And what about the ones who don't go under? What are they going to do? They're going to buy up their farms. And the ones who don't go under, and there's not a drought, they're going to have bigger farms. And what about those guys who lost their farm during the drought? What are they going to do? They don't have any land anymore. They went under. Well, they're going to have to work for the bigger farms that now exist. And that this is the way things tend to go. Maybe you have yeomen for a while. They don't stay that way. The market tends to naturally move toward monopoly, right? And this is the phenomenon of natural monopolies. It's also what Marx called the general law of capitalist accumulation, right? A capitalist corporation wants to make more profits, and once it has more profits, it invests to get even bigger profits, and then it invests to get even bigger profits. And this is the way the market tends to work. And you get what are called natural monopolies. And it's so crazy that the capitalists themselves, J.P. Morgan and others, came forward and they said, we need antitrust laws to prevent monopolies from just completely wrecking the economy, right? Monopolistic stagnation is the natural result of monopolies. When you have one business that controls an entire field, there's no competition, and it ruins everything. So antitrust legislation exists to try and deal with this problem. And there's all kinds of laws that exist. For example, if you own a movie studio, you cannot own one of the movie theater chains, right? The owner of AMC tried to buy one of the Hollywood Big Seven studio, and the U.S. government said you can't do that, because if a movie theater company starts a movie production company, they will only show their movies, and that will lead to a monopoly. And there are many examples of this in law. There are all kinds of laws written to prevent the rise of natural monopolies. And what we generally have is we don't have monopoly in the sense of one corporation that dominates the car market. No, we got the big three, right? We got, GM, Chrysler, and Ford, right? The big three. Plus, we have some foreign corporations, Toyota, et cetera. Hyundai, right? Honda, right? And that you tend to get the concentration of, the market tends to be dominated by two or three competitors. And those competitors tend to be involved with banks, right? And the combination of banking with industry is what they call finance capital. And we live in the era where basically everything we have is made by finance capital monopolistic corporations, right? If you're driving a car, your car isn't made by some mom and pop car company, right? Your car is made by GM, Chrysler, Ford, Hyundai, Toyota. There's like less than 10 big car companies in this world that you can be driving, right? If you are wearing clothing, your clothing is probably made by a clothing monopoly, unless you bought it from somebody who hand stitches it themselves or some little tiny place. The chances are most of the clothes in your closet are made by a monopoly. Every product you buy, for the most part, is made by some huge monopolistic corporation. And that the world is really ruled by Western monopolies. Coca-Cola, right? That's a huge monopoly tied in with food, tied in with everything else. Monsanto, right? You think about the huge corporations that dominate the world. These are monopolistic entities. And they are in bed with governments, and they dominate the world. And in times past, these you had a situation where countries exported products, right? America might export really good tires. America might export really good cars. But now it's not the product that gets exported. It's the company itself. The company doesn't just send products overseas. The company goes overseas and sets up one of its own factories. And the corporation itself spreads across the planet, the export of capital. So we have huge corporations that are tied in and under the domination of big banks. and they export themselves all over the world, and they dominate the world. The world is ruled by Western monopolies, corporations based in Western countries that have expanded and exported themselves all over the world and dominate markets. And there's many examples of this. Oil is a great example, right? You got, Chevron, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil, 4 big corporations that dominate the oil markets. And they dominate the world's oil markets, and they are all over the world. And there's Nigerian oil that they dominate. There's Saudi oil they dominate. There's oil in different parts of the world that's under their control, and they're tied in with big banks, right? For example, ExxonMobil, which is the modern day descendant of JP Morgan. I'm sorry, it's the modern day descendant of Rockefeller's Standard Oil, and it's combined with the Morgans and General Electric, and there's one giant bank that they're under, and it's called Chase Bank. So if you buy General Electric products, one of the biggest Pentagon manufacturers, one of the biggest manufacturers of electronic commodities, and if you buy gasoline, ExxonMobil, and you're under the Chase Bank, right? BP, right? British Petroleum, a major oil company. It's a subsidiary of a huge bank in Britain called HSBC Bank, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Why is there a bank in England called HSBC Bank? Well, that's because Britain used to dominate and control the economy of China, and they set up HSBC Bank to control China's economy through their territory that they had of Hong Kong, their British protectorate of Hong Kong. It was a chunk of China seized by the British Empire in the Opium Wars, and they had a bank set up there to dominate China's economy, and at that point sell China lots of drugs, sell China opium. And HSBC Bank and BP are one finance capital monopoly. And there's many examples of this, right? That the world is ruled by Western monopolies, Wall Street and London-based corporations. You got a few corporations in, like France. You got Total, for example, in France, right? You've got, Italian car making companies, and, there's other monopolies, but it is Western monopoly corporations that dominate the world. And Western monopoly corporations dominate the world, and that's the economic system that we have. That's the economic system that we have, and the world is dominated by these corporations, and these corporations hold back growth. They seize parts of the world as their captive markets, and they hold back economic growth. There's many examples of this we can talk about. I mean, NAFTA, right? People in Mexico have been growing their own food since before Christopher Columbus came. But now if you go to the store in Mexico, the food comes from American monopoly corporations like Kraft and Monsanto. The people on the island people in Haiti, they've been growing their own food for hundreds of years. But now, thanks to NAFTA, if you go to the store in Haiti to buy food, most of the food comes from American monopolistic corporations. Nigeria is another example. Nigeria is the largest oil exporting country in Africa. So you'd think the people of Nigeria must be very, very wealthy and prosperous, but they're not. Nigeria has a very low life expectancy. It's got a very low rate of literacy among adults in Nigeria. The infant mortality rate is very high. Why is that the case when Nigeria has so much oil? Because the people of Nigeria and the economy of Nigeria doesn't reap the benefits. The benefits of Nigeria's oil goes to ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. And there are so many examples of this where Western monopolies dominate the world, and they seize countries and they seize territories. And largely what wars are about is about claiming countries as captive markets. World War I was a fight between the various colonial powers over who got what, who got to exploit. You can go back to the Spanish-American War. What was that about? Well, there were 2 major Western capitalist countries, Spain and America, and they were fighting over who got to control the Philippines and who got to control Cuba. And America won the war, and America got to sell its products to the Philippines, and America got to sell its products to Cuba, and Spain lost. And then there are many other wars, and the war that kind of defined the modern era, World War I, was a war between the various colonial powers. They were fighting over who got Africa, Who got Asia? Who got South America? And there was contention. The Germans were expanding their presence in Africa, and the French and the British and the Americans said, no, you don't. And 20 million people were sent to their deaths in a horrific war, the First World War. And it was a war over which Western monopolies got to dominate the world, which Western monopolies got to engage in territorial partition. The world is ruled by Western monopolies. And this is an economic system. Now, Vladimir Lenin called this imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. But prior to that, you had Henry Charles Carey, the economic advisor to Abraham Lincoln. He called it the English system. And he talked about the American Revolution. How during the American Revolution, the 13 colonies were basically, they were territories seized by the British Empire. And the British wouldn't let the Americans set up their own corporations, their own economy. And they forced them to buy their tea and buy their products from the British at rates that they didn't approve of. And the 13 colonies were held as a captive market by the British Empire, and they wanted to develop their own industries and their own economy. And that was what the American Revolution was about. And Henry Charles Carey argued that this system of monopolistic corporations dominating the world and holding back development by controlling and dominating international trade, that this is the English system. That's what he called it. Free trade, or the English system. Now in Eurasia, in Russia and in China, there's a lot of talk about geopolitics and how if you go back thousands of years, long before capitalism, to the age of slavery, the age of feudalism, there are different types of civilizations that exist. There are empires of the sea and empires of the land, civilizations of the sea, civilizations of the land, telerocracy and thalassocracy, and that they develop differently. And this model of an empire that holds back development by controlling trade routes with a mighty navy is the result of an ocean-based civilization. And they call this Atlanticism. Atlanticism. So there are many different theories about why, but the system that the world is under right now is the rule of the Western monopolies. You can call it imperialism, you can call it the English system, you can call it Atlanticism, but Wall Street and London run the world, and their corporations dominate the world economy. They're huge monopolies that are backed up and in bed with governments. They run the world, and that's the system that we live under. Principle number 5. Principle number 6. The monopolies push destructive accumulation. These monopolies that sit at the top of the world, they want to stay at the top forever. And for a long time, they have been looking at the world economy and trying to figure out its problems. And they have developed various theories about how they can destroy the productive forces in order to keep the economy stable, how they can use degrowth methods to make society poorer overall, but also make society more stable. And Robert Malthus was a British economist in the 1790s, at the time of the British Empire. And he's the guy who came up at the time of the French Revolution. And he's the guy who came up with the term overpopulation. Across the English Channel, there had been a revolution in France. And one of the first economists of Britain, Robert Malthus, came up with this theory that the French Revolution was caused by overpopulation. The French population had grown faster than the food supply. And this is kind of true about feudalism. In the feudal mode of production, where you don't have technology, you don't have mechanized agriculture, you just have human beings with their horse-drawn plows, growing crops. It's true, the population tends to grow faster than the food supply. And that's why every 100 years or so in feudalism, there would be peasant wars and uprisings, there would be a crusade, there would be a black plague or something, right? That under feudalism, it is a problem that recurs, that the population grows faster than the food, and it leads to societal calamity. And, in China, they used to talk about a cycle that went on, right? Of, like one empire would pop up and then it would become corrupt. But it was really just about the population would rise higher than the food supply. And so you'd have to have a big war. And then feudalism, this is a problem. That's what Malthus was writing about, because most of human history up to that point had been feudalism. France was a feudal society. And in France, feudalism was being ripped apart by a massive revolution that involved all the aristocrats and landowning people and the king all getting their heads cut off. And so Robert Malthus wrote this essay called Principle on Population Growth, where he came up with this concept of overpopulation. Now, at the time, he was just trying to explain the French Revolution. Later, though, in the 1880s and 1890s, in the 1880s and the 1890s, there emerged a political movement of wealthy people in Britain that argued that the problems of capitalism, this problem of glut, was caused by overpopulation. And they formed what was called the Neo-Malthusian Society. And they began aggressively promoting birth control, aggressively promoting abortion, and urging poor people not to have children. And they argued that the problems of capitalism were caused by overpopulation and eugenics, the idea of breeding people, and racial pseudoscience, the idea that some races are naturally superior to others, what they call social Darwinism, the application of Charles Darwin's theories to crude social engineering schemes. All of that is neo-Malthusianism. It's not classical Malthusianism, because classical Malthus himself was writing about actual problems in feudalism, trying to explain the French Revolution. He didn't quite get it, but he wasn't exactly wrong in describing feudalism. However, neo-Malthusianism, which was largely paid for by the Rockefeller family, largely paid for by the Rothschilds family in Britain, some of the wealthiest elite families in Britain and in America, they promoted neo-Malthusianism. And the idea was, in order to stabilize capitalism, we need to reduce the population. And one of the results of this is an organization that still exists called Planned Parenthood. They were originally called the Birth Control League. And they promoted the idea of the cruelty of charity. I believe Margaret Sanger, one of the founders of Planned Parenthood, she had an essay called The Cruelty of Charity, where she said if you help poor people, they breed more. Right? And it's a chapter of her book, The Pivot of Civilization, The Cruelty of Charity by Margaret Sanger. And the idea is that, when we feed poor people, as a result, they have more kids, and that leads to more overpopulation. And what we need to do is we need to just let the poor people die off so they don't reproduce. And the reason they're poor is they have inferior genes. They're not, I mean, it's pretty ruthless. And there were all kinds of methods and ideas that we needed to stabilize capitalism with degrowth methods. That was something that big monopolies have been pushing for a long, long time. After Cecil Rhodes, who was the founder of Rhodesia, the settler colonial state that's now called Zimbabwe. After it won its independence, it was called Zimbabwe. Cecil Rhodes, he very famously left money in his will for the creation of a society to promote the ideals of the British Empire. The Fabian Society that was formed as kind of a liberal social democratic organization that promoted the idea of overpopulation and neo-Malthusianism. H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer, H.G. Wells, the guy who wrote The Time Machine, was a big advocate of these kinds of ideas too. And what this is about, it's called destructive accumulation. We'll drive down the population, we'll kill a bunch of people, the population will go down, and that'll stabilize the economy. Also, after World War I, Rosa Luxemburg, who was a German Marxist, she observed that World War I was rooted in this problem of overproduction, and that war, and as a method of trying to stabilize the economy and deal with this problem of glut, war as a way to destroy productive forces and inject military spending into the economy was going to become more and more necessary. This is what she wrote. This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. First, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but then when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences, the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. So what she was saying is basically, in the lead up to World War I, this problem of overproduction, of poverty amid plenty, of the economy becoming more and more unstable as it becomes more and more efficient to produce goods, the only way to stabilize it was they had to have a big war in which 20 million people died, and there was all this destruction. And that gave a boost to the economy, loads of military spending, loads of destruction, and that kind of rebooted the economy with destruction. However, it was going to come a time where that would become even more and more necessary. It's like a drug addict, right? When someone first uses drugs, they do it to have a good time. It's recreational. Woo, I want a thrill. I want to use drugs. But after they start using drugs, it gets to the point where they need the drug just to feel normal. They have to have the drug and they need to feel normal. And then after a while, that normal they feel when they're on the drug becomes less and less pleasant. And even when they're feeling normal, when they're on the drug, they're still feeling sickly. And eventually they die of an overdose, right? And that's kind of what war as a form of destructive accumulation has become for the capitalist economy. Yeah, when World War I happened, it rebooted everything. And you had the Roaring 20s. And when World War II happened, you had the post-World War II economic expansion. But now, fast forward to where we are today, almost 100 years later, and we're in a situation where we have to have war all the time just to keep our economy going, right? Destructive accumulation without the huge amounts of spending on the military, without the huge amounts of destruction of competitors and destroying different countries and destroying productive forces, our economy would have collapsed, right? Part of the reason, you remember when they destroyed Iraq, the oil prices went up. And why did the oil prices go up? Well, a major oil producing country was destroyed, and that rebooted, that poured all kinds of money into the energy sector because an oil producing country was destroyed, right? And that the destruction and the spending that comes from war is something that our economy is largely dependent on. And this is fascist economics. Now, the book that I learned the most about fascism from is a biography of Hjalmar Schacht, who was Hitler's economist. Hjalmar Schacht, right? This is the guy. If you want to understand the Nazis, don't read Hitler. Don't read what the Nazis said. Read what the Nazi economist said. This guy, Hjalmar Schacht, right? He was the economist and the banker who was largely responsible for Hitler's economic policies. Hjalmar Schacht, he was a German financier, and he made friends with Hitler, and he's the guy who largely got Hitler in power in Germany. And Schacht arranged for Hitler to become the dictator of Germany. And after Hitler took power, they rebooted Germany's economy, and they rebooted it with a number of very quick, dramatic measures. All of the measures that Hjalmar Schacht imposed were degrowth measures for the most part, right? The first thing that they did was they restarted military spending. It had been illegal under the Versailles Treaty for Germany to have its own army. They pulled out of the Versailles Treaty and they started building tanks and guns and weapons and all kinds of military spending. And they put all the communists and all the labor union leaders and all the social democrats in concentration camps. So you had hundreds of thousands of people that were no longer looking for jobs. They were not competing for jobs. And then you had, in addition to that, hundreds of thousands of people hired to be guards in those concentration camps, and hundreds of thousands of people hired to build the concentration camps. And so you had a big section of the population not out looking for jobs, but instead in prison uniforms. And you had a whole bunch of people hired to be guards. And on top of that, what did the people in the concentration camps do? They were slave laborers. They worked for free as concentration camp inmates. And so they rented them out to corporations. Volkswagen had whole factories where they didn't have any paid employees. They just had slave laborers, from the concentration camps. And that they rebooted Germany's economy with a huge burst of military spending and with the creation of a slave labor underclass. They basically created the world's first military industrial complex and the world's first prison industrial complex. And they created it overnight. And they built the Autobahn highways, which are still intact in Germany, which connect, Germany, these highways that go straight across Germany. And they also shamed women out of the workforce. They said that, that if a woman is working, she's taking a job away from a German man. They had a public relations campaign against women having jobs outside the home. And they increased the marriage bonus, that you got a bonus if you got married. And as a result, there was no unemployment. They eradicated unemployment. When Hitler took power in Germany, he didn't say, I promise to kill the Jews. That's not what he said. He said, I promise to make sure that there is no unemployment. I will give everyone a job. And he did it, right? In 1934, 35, Germany had full employment and their economy was going again. But it was not going due to productive measures. They were not becoming more productive as a society. They were getting poorer. They created a slave labor underclass. They created military spending. They pushed women out of the workforce. And it was largely what you can call reverse inflation. Germany had a huge problem of inflation prior to the rise of Hitler. And Hitler made society poorer, And as a result of society being poorer, as a result of that, what's on screen? Is the book is on screen? Hitler's Banker, right? As a result of everyone getting poorer, the economy kept going, right? I think that's Hitler's Rival. That's a different book. Is that what you're looking for? Or do I have Hitler's Banker on here? Right? It's an important book if you want to understand economics. But anyway, yeah, that destructive accumulation is what the big monopolies are pushing for, because they can't continue to allow growth. Smaller business owners want growth because they want to make more money. But the big ultra monopolies largely rely on destructive accumulation. And destructive accumulation is degrowth. It's making society poorer as a method for stabilizing the economy. And in America, after World War II, we launched what they call military Keynesianism. Our economy is reliant on huge amounts of military spending. In America, we spend more money on our military than any other country in the world, than most other countries in the world combined. And that's not because we just need to go to war all those times. It's not because we need it for defense. It's a stimulus. It keeps our economy going. Military Keynesianism. John Maynard Keynes was the British economist who said, in order to make capitalism work properly, the government needs to spend large amounts of money. That's what John Maynard Keynes argued. And after World War II, we adopted what was called military Keynesianism. And the U.S. economy is reliant on huge amounts of money being spent on the military. That's what keeps our economy going. And that's an important thing to understand as well. Now, neoliberalism, it was a trend that began in the 1970s, right? After World War II, you had the greatest episode of economic growth in human history, the post-World War II economic expansion. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But World War II was a big, huge, destructive war in which millions of people were killed, and destructive accumulation. After World War II, the economy was going again. All kinds of people that had been unemployed were dead and not looking for jobs. All kinds of things needed to be rebuilt, and so the world economy experienced a huge spurt of economic growth from the 1950s to the early 1970s. However, in the mid-1970s, the post-World War II economic expansion came to an end. And it is then, in the 1970s, that we started to hear about neoliberalism, which is this idea that we need to have services that are provided by the government be done by private corporations, the privatization of public services. And, one example of that is what they call school choice. All over the Western world, we have public education in which, children get a free education. And it was largely socialists and communists who went out and demanded that. In Germany, the German Social Democrats went out and demanded that there be daycare provided for children, that children be given an education. So the German Kaiser created Kindergarten, right? Kindergarten was created so that children could get an education. As the result of the Social Democrats and the socialists going out and demanding the creation of that, they created it. And it actually ended up strengthening German imperialism because all the kids learned to march in line and they got indoctrinated into German imperialist ideas. So it actually kind of worked out, but it was because of public demands. Public education in America only came about as a result, in a lot of ways, as a result of the overthrow of slavery. It was during Reconstruction that you had the first public education in many U.S. states as a result of the overturning of slavery, et cetera, teaching the children of slaves to read, and young white people as well were going to those schools. And that public education is something that has been demanded. Starting in the 1970s, but especially in the 80s and 90s, there was this idea that rather than have the school be built by the government and have the teachers be public employees, it would be better to have the school be run by a private corporation or a private institution. Now, most private schools are what they call what they are run by a church, or they're run by a nonprofit, right? They're like run by a foundation, right? That whether it's a church that people donate money to, or it's part of their activities as a church, or it's a nonprofit like a foundation that runs it, kind of like a college or whatever. However, we now have in America, there's a rising trend of what they call charter schools. Those are schools for profit. Schools for profit, where shareholders invest money and they make a profit for every kid who goes to school. Now, what could go wrong with that, right? Instead of having schools where, public employees are getting paid a wage to teach your children, instead we have schools that get paid per student. And so they want to give the students as little as they possibly can to keep as much of that money for themselves. What could go wrong with that? And charter schools are part of neoliberalism. Another example of neoliberalism is prisons for profit, right? Instead of having prisons where people who commit crimes go and get locked up, and the people who run the prison are government employees, let's have a private corporation that is paid per person who's locked in jail. What could possibly go wrong with that, right? And neoliberalism, or wars, right? It used to be, and it still is largely, that soldiers are government employees and that the military is a wing of the government. But why not have Academy, Blackwater? Why not have a private corporation fight our wars where they get paid? A private corporation gets paid for every soldier who goes out in the battlefield. What could possibly go wrong with that? And the privatization of public services is a big part of neoliberalism. It's this idea that it's always better if the market it does it. It's not. You want to just get rid of public employees, and that started to really become dominant in the 70s and 80s. This idea that public services can be run by private corporations, and it has led to all kinds of very, very, very big problems in America. Very, very big problems in America. But it's neoliberalism. But it's destructive accumulation. It's taking something that used to be just kind of something the state paid for to stabilize society and turning it into a mechanism for profits to be made for private corporations as a way to try and stabilize the economy. Destructive accumulation. And as a result, society gets poorer. Principle number 6. The Cold War was a struggle for economic growth. All right. If you look at the Cold War, and this is something that's very hard for people to understand, the Cold War was not a fight about communism as Americans understand it versus the free market. That is not what it was about. And if you understand it that way, you're not going to understand what went on in the Cold War, right? What it was about was that there were countries around the world that were impoverished, fighting for their independence politically and economically so they could have economic growth. And the way we're taught about it is communism is just this dumb idea that everyone should be paid exactly the same, no matter how hard they work. It's about making everybody equal. And well, that's what you think happened, right? There were countries where they tried to make everyone equal. And then there was America where you're not going to understand what was going on. China was one of the poorest countries in the world. And when the communists came to power in China, they didn't just make everyone equal. And, no, they centrally planned the economy and became what they are today, the second largest economy in the world. When Stalin led Russia with his 5-year plans, he didn't just take the country as it currently was with all the wealth that already existed and make everyone equal. No, he did 5-year economic plans, and the country became an industrial superpower. The biggest power plants in the world, wiped out illiteracy, electrification, big universities. They expanded their economy. They fought for their independence, right? They fight for their independence. And as a result, they grew, right? And the Cuban Revolution was about the fact that Cuba was a poor country, and the communists took power in order to build power plants and build, and industrialize Cuba. And that the revolutions that have happened in the 20th century, the communist revolutions of the 20th century, the anti-colonial movements, and it got to the point many of them weren't communist. They were Ba'athist Arab socialist. You had the Islamic Revolution of Iran, African socialism, these were impoverished countries in the third world fighting for the right to have economic growth. And they centrally planned their economies in order to break it out from Wall Street, because if you have a free market, Wall Street has, the competitive edge. They got the bigger corporation, and Wall Street monopolies will take over. But if the state takes control of the economy, by planning the economy, you can organize the economy to have economic growth. And that's what the Cold War was about. Various countries aligned with the Soviet Union, including the Soviet Union itself, had revolutions so they could centrally plan their economies and have economic growth. That's what these revolutions were about. And the Western monopolies did not like that. And they wanted to dominate the world. They wanted to maintain their monopoly. And the developing world rejected that. And that's what the Cold War was about. And the BRICS economy of today, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS economy of today is based on what happened during the 20th century. It wouldn't be here, right? Egypt wouldn't be electrified if the Soviet Union had not teamed up with Abdel Nasser to build the Aswan Dam. India's economic development in the 1950s and 60s was largely because of Soviet investment. The Soviet Union was aligned with the government of India and brought in, engineers and technicians and industrialized India. The Chinese Revolution was sponsored by the Soviet Union. And up until 1960, the Soviet Union was pouring lots of aid into China. And that countries that had been kept poor broke out of imperialism and began to have economic growth. And that's what the Cold War was about. And you have to understand that. That's principle number 6, that the Cold War was a struggle of impoverished countries to have economic growth. Principle number 7, and this is an important one, the computer revolution has created a long-term, unsolvable value crisis, right? That capitalism has had this problem of gluts of overproduction from the beginning, right? That we can't buy back what we produce. The wages paid out in the process of production are never enough to buy back what is produced, and that labor-saving technology, which should be a good thing, leads to even less wages being paid out and less profit being made by the owner, and as a result, it leads to economic problems. The computer revolution is such a big technological leap. What's happening now with AI, the internet, all the big technological leaps that have come out of the computer revolution are making capitalism permanently unsustainable. And where did the computer revolution come from? Well, largely, the computer revolution is the result of this guy, Alan Turing, right? During the Second World War, the government of Britain, not the private sector, not the free market, but the government of Britain, found a math professor named Alan Turing. And they hired him with government money as part of a central military plan to defeat the Germans. They hired him to make a decoding machine. A machine that would be smart enough to crack the codes of the German submarines and etc. Alan Turing's decoding machine was purely the result of state oversight of the economy and government investment. No, the free market did not create the computer revolution. State central planning did. And as a result of Alan Turing's decoding machine, the science of modern computing came into existence. Then what? In 1970, a book was published by a U.S. foreign policy strategist called Zbigniew Brzezinski. And this book is called Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era. And in that book, Zbigniew Brzezinski argued that the cultural turmoil and the social turmoil that had led to the 1960s political upsurge, that it wasn't a communist revolution. It wasn't an economic crisis. It was rather a renegotiation of social relations based on the availability of information. That because of the computer revolution and because of modern television, etc., it was now people had more information than they'd ever had before. And because of that, because they had more information, they were questioning social norms, and that people didn't follow traditional religions the same way they did. People weren't loyal to governments in the same way they previously had been. And that society was renegotiating a lot of things based on the accessibility of information, having television, having books be widely available. The computer revolution was making information more accessible. And as a result of that, social relations were changing. And Brzezinski argued that rather than oppose the kind of cultural upsurge that was happening as a result of information technology, the USA should embrace it and become the center of information technology and dominate the technotronic era and weaponize technology to Americanize the world and have the American system be spread all over the world. This is Brzezinski, the anti-Soviet fanatic. Zbigniew Brzezinski published this book, America Enters the Technotronic Era, saying that basically in order to defeat communism, we need to dominate information technology and use the confusion and wave of social unrest that comes when people have access to new information, use that to bring down communism and bring down the Soviet Union and dominate the world through dominating technology. It's all spelled out in the book. Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And he was speaking for the intelligence agencies, saying that basically we need to invest in computer technology. And he pointed out that the Soviet Union, they're pretty good at computers, but they don't have the resources to mass produce them, right? They don't have the ability to mass produce computer technology the way we do. And it's true. The Soviet Union developed their own home computer system in 1981, the Electronica BK0010, but they couldn't send it, right? They couldn't mass produce it, right? I mean, average people in the Soviet Union couldn't have a computer in their homes. The Soviet Union could invent a home computer, but they couldn't mass produce it. There was then the NATO Treaty on Multilateral Technological Controls that forbid any NATO country from giving what they called high technology to the Soviet Union. So as the computer revolution is happening, they basically forbid sharing any of the computer technology with the Soviet Union. And U.S. intelligence funded corporations. That Silicon Valley was created by the CIA. Okay, it was created by the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Department of Defense, right? The internet comes from DARPA, right? From the Department of Defense. Amazon was created as a corporation in coordination with the U.S. Department of Defense. You look at the history of Microsoft, you look at the history of IBM. They're all getting loans provided by the National Security Agency, getting loans provided by the CIA. It's because of Brzezinski and his belief that America, for intelligence and geostrategic purposes, needed to dominate information technology. That's where the computer revolution came from. Again, not created by the free market. We're all taught, oh, well, the free market, created the computer revolution. It's only because of, capitalism. These nerds tinkering in their garages had ideas and the market. No, actually, government, just like with Alan Turing, government decided for intelligence purposes, America must control information technology, and government funded the computer revolution and created the corporations and oversaw Silicon Valley. Government passed the NATO Treaty on Multilateral Controls to keep the Soviet Union from getting any of the computer technology. And that's where the computer revolution came from. And the computer revolution, which at this point has turned into AI, right? With artificial intelligence, machines can do almost anything that human beings can do. It has created an economic crisis that is unsolvable within the confines and the capitalist mode of production. Computers can do almost anything, and human labor power is vanishing from the process of production very, 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 very quickly. And as a result, we're having an economic crisis. This problem of poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, is greater than it has ever been, and it's not solvable. There's no correction. It just keeps getting worse. We have the ability to produce products more efficiently than ever before. Machines can make almost anything. And as a result, the role of human beings in the process of production, the role of human beings at the assembly line, is getting lower and lower and lower and lower than ever before. And, it's getting to the point we've got a gig economy, right? With Uber drivers, et cetera. But they've already got robots delivering food in different parts of the world. And it's got to the point that robots can do almost anything. And if we had a rationally organized economy, that would be a great thing. But we live in a highly irrational economic system where profits are in command, So as the robots are coming and as human labor power is becoming less and less necessary, we're heading for a very deep and long-term economic crisis rooted in this natural problem of capitalism. So principle number 8, we need a pro-growth, anti-monopoly government in America. The only way out of this is if in America we have a government, a state that breaks the power of the big monopolies. A government that represents the majority of the population against the big monopolies. A government of action that will fight for working families. And we at the Center for Political Innovation have a 4-point economic plan of how the United States economy could be very quickly fixed. 1, hire all the unemployed young people and put them to work rebuilding the country, paving the roads, building high-speed railway, building bridges, building hospitals and schools, pay them wages, right? Don't make them do it for free. Hire the unemployed young people to rebuild America. Pave our bridges and highways, build high-speed trains, build new power plants, build new hospitals, new water treatment facilities, hire the next generation, new schools, give this country a high-tech upgrade, and hire the unemployed to rebuild America. A mass works progress program. That would be number 1. Number 2 would be public ownership of our natural resources. If the oil of America generates wealth, that wealth should go into the public budget. If the natural gas of America generates wealth, that wealth should go into the public budget. And the way you pay for this mass rejuvenation, this mass rebuilding of America, is you hire the young people by nationalizing, putting oil and gas and coal and timber and all the natural resources under public ownership. Step number 3 would be the creation of a national bank so that credit is assigned strategically in the interest of an overall economic plan. Rather than having banks lend money based on what makes profit for them, instead, right, have a national bank that injects credit strategically into communities based on an overall plan of economic rejuvenation, and ultimately then enact an economic bill of rights. Invest in the population by providing education, by providing health care, by having full employment, a jobs guarantee, hire anyone who's unemployed and put them to work, rebuilding the country, right? Health care, education as an investment in our population. And if you do that, the U.S. economy would rebound very, very quickly. But in order to do that, you would have to break the power of the big banks and the big oil companies that dominate the U.S. economy. And you'd have to have a government that was aligned with a well-organized mass movement of the population. And at that point, you'd have a government that was investing in people and defeating the power of usury and defeating the power of big banks and defeating the power of fictitious capital, right? And in order to do that, you'd need what would be called an anti-monopoly coalition. Basically, having a state that is pro-growth and pro-humanity and anti-monopoly would be to the benefit of everyone in America except the big monopolies. There would be even some of the richest people that would benefit, right? You can't have a prosperous store in your neighborhood if there's not a nice road for the people to drive on to get to it. And you can't have a prosperous business in a neighborhood if everyone in the neighborhood has died from opioids, right? And that the bulk, the overwhelming majority of the American people, of the American economy wants economic growth. But we are gripped by big monopolies that have determined the only way they can stay in power is with destructive accumulation, right? The only way they can stay in power is by destroying things, destroying countries around the world with war, destroying Americans in a prison industrial complex, in a drug addiction epidemic, in a medical system that tries to make people as sick as possible to milk as much profit out of them being sick and doesn't emphasize preventive care. Right? We have an economy at this point that is based on destructive accumulation. But with an anti-monopoly government, we could have the opposite, a government that invests in people and is organizing the economy rationally in order to make sure that economic growth is long-term and breaks the power of the big monopolies. The only way out of this for America is we need a pro-growth, anti-monopoly government. And such a government would be friendly toward the countries that have broken out of imperialism, like Russia and China and India, and the countries that are no longer, because it would want to trade with them on the basis of win-win cooperation, because they would want a more productive economy. What we need is a pro-growth, anti-monopoly government in America. Now, those are my principles on economics. And I don't think any of that is too hard to understand. It's actually very easy to understand. But there is a huge effort not to understand this. On the right, they tell you the free market is just magical. And if you just privatize everything, there's never any monopolies and there's never any gluts of overproduction and there's never any problems. Well, that's bullshit. And on the left, they think the answer is, oh, we just got to, tax rich people and have the government give people free stuff. And it's not that simple either. And that attitude of, oh, screw this, give me some free stuff, that's a pessimistic attitude. We need a pro-growth government that invests in people and breaks the power of the big monopolies. We need a government of action that fights for working families. That is economics. And if you understand everything I just said, you understand economics, right? That is what you need to know about economics, right? And that is what the Center for Political Innovation believes. That's what I believe. And it draws heavily from Marxism, Leninism, but it also draws heavily from different schools of thought, Henry Charles Carey, from Eurasian Atlanticist geopolitics, from Lyndon LaRouche and others, right? This is beyond simply Marxism. If you talk about communism in America, people immediately think it turns into an argument about should everyone be equal or not. I'm not interested in making everyone equal. The only way you get equality is by eradicating scarcity. As long as some have and some have not, right? As long as there is scarcity, there will be inequality. The road to abolishing inequality is rational control of the economy with a pro-growth government that can make sure that a rising tide lifts all boats. And as human beings become more creative and more efficient with technology, society becomes wealthier and the amount of wealth in society goes up and growth expands, right? There is no limit to growth. There is no limit to what human beings are capable of with their creativity and their brilliance. And economics is not that hard to understand. However, there is a big effort to keep you from hearing this. And on the left and on the right, we get two versions of Nazi economics, two versions of fascist economics. Fascist economics is degrowth, right? And on the right, degrowth is austerity. Cut public services, cut wages, cut government spending, and we can cut our way into economic growth. On the left, degrowth is done in the form of environmental, climate alarmism, government control, and privatization, driving down wages. But they're both wrong, right? Growth is good, and we need a pro-growth, anti-monopoly government. And if you would like to learn and read more from this perspective, right? I didn't make this up, right? I mean, I have kind of synthesized this into our, beliefs as the Center for Political Innovation. And the book that kind of lays it all out is, the book that I wrote that was kind of the book where I first laid out this vision is called Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And this book is available in Chinese, and it is, printed in China and studied in China. This book, it's available as an audiobook online. A guy named Tyler did a full audiobook of it. I published sections of it as little pamphlet-sized books online. This book is where you get the whole vision, right? Where is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And that's the book that I wrote. But this book draws from other books. I quote extensively. And the books that I draw from in this book are, and I will hold them up, right? If you want this perspective, a very important book to read that will help you understand degrowth, that'll help you understand human labor power, etc. A very important book to read is Dialectical Economics by Lynn Marcus. This is a very, very, very good book about human labor power, about degrowth, about growth, etc. I recommend this. Another book that I will recommend that you should read, right? If you want to learn this perspective, you should read Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. And this is about the computer revolution and the tendency of the falling rate of profit and the problem of overproduction. Read this book. Another book that you should read, right? It was written in the 1980s about the exact same stuff. It's called High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy, right? I recommend you read this book. In addition to that, we got The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary. This book is also very, very important if you want to understand this stuff. It's lectures by a labor activist named Nelson Peary. Goes over the exact same concepts, robots, replacing human beings as labor power, the creation of a kind of an underclass of gig economy workers. It's all here in this. In addition to that, there's one other book I would recommend, and it's about fascism as degrowth and degrowth economics. It's called Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. And this is by a British economist, Marxist economist from Britain in the 1930s. As fascism was rising, he explains what's causing the Great Depression, the crisis of overproduction. He explains the way the Nazis were able to reboot their economy. He explains it all in here. Fascism and Social Revolution. Those are the books that I recommend. First of all, if you want, this perspective in great depth, read Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution by yours truly, Caleb Maupin. Read Dialectical Economics by Lynn Marcus. Read High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy. Read Low Wage Capitalism by Fred Goldstein. And read Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. You read those books, you will understand economics, right? And understanding economics is not hard. And do not let them tell you that you can't understand economics. You can understand economics. It is not hard to understand economics, but you have to look past their economics, right? If you go to college, you're either going to learn a kind of mild Keynesian economics or you're going to learn neoliberal economics. But we need to study the economics of countries like China, like Russia, right? Russian President Putin is an economic genius. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they were practicing free market neoliberal economics, and the country was being looted. Russian President Vladimir Putin fixed Russia's economy with economic policies very similar to what CPI advocates. What did he do? He put oil and gas under public ownership. And when oil and gas were under public ownership, he used the oil and gas money to rebuild the industries, to invest in the population, to provide services, and to strategically inject credit and create different corporations that would be good for Russia's economy. And Putin enacted these kinds of economic policies and rebooted Russia's economy. And you can read about it. He even wrote an academic thesis about how to do it. And it worked. And if you look at China's economy, the reason that they continue to have economic growth is it's like this. They have government-controlled corporations. They have strategic lending of money where credit is strategically injected. They have a state that kind of works against the big monopolies and tells the different businesses where they can go. They have a 5-year economic plan, and their economy continues to grow. And nobody is talking about this. And the reason that I come on here and I'm doing this presentation is I'm watching this silly argument about communism that's taking place. And nobody seems to understand this. But I understand Russia, been there many times, met the president, spoken with the president. You can see the video. Met Alexander Dugin, a very important Russian philosopher. I've been to Russia. I know how the economy works. I've been to China. I've seen China up close. I've studied the economics of China. I know how China works, right? I've been to Nicaragua, a very successful country. I can even show you a photo of me with the son of the Nicaraguan president. And we discussed, and I told him about how amazing the roads of Nicaragua were. But me and Laureano Ortega have met, right? This is me discussing economics with the son of Nicaraguan president Daniel Ortega. I know how their economy works. You can watch an interview I did with President Ibrahim Raisi of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I sat down and had a 12-minute conversation interview that was televised all over the world with the president of Iran. And I've been to Iran and I've spoken to Iranian economists, and I understand their resistance economy, not capitalism, but Islam. They have a revolutionary state that comes out of an anti-colonial revolution that controls their natural resources, which has control of banking, injecting credit, and they have a market sector, and it works. I understand how this stuff works. I understand it. And I'm watching this silly argument about communism on television right now and on the internet, and nobody is talking about what I know very, very, very well. I understand economics, and you can understand it too. So now I did a report about Trump saying that communism is when everyone has a free car. Or a free house. And I did a report about this. It turned out pretty nice. It was my RT report about Donald Trump's latest, pounding the podium against communism. I'll put that on. Then we can do the roll call, and then I'll answer people's questions. I see a lot of people have sent questions. I do appreciate that. Just a quick reminder, the best way to send questions is to go to buymeacoffee.com. Super chats also work. I see 3 people have sent super chats, and I'll be answering those. You can also do Rumble rants. I see we got a couple Rumble rants. Lori Lamb has sent a Rumble rant. So send your questions for the second half of the show. I'm going to put on my report, then we'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer people's questions. So yeah, I guess we'll put on, this is my RT report about Trump's latest anti-communism tirade and what's really going on there. And from there, I'll start answering questions. I'll do the roll call, and then I'll answer questions.
You can be loyal to Karl Marx, or you can be loyal to America. You can be a communist, or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. As for those who peddle Marxist lies about our heritage, who tell our children that we live on stolen land or that our heroes were oppressors, they're doing something much worse than slandering our past. They are slandering and attacking our future. Not going to let that happen. They're trying to tear down the great American character, to destroy the people who declared independence, who crossed the Delaware, who settled the West, and conquered the skies. You know who those people are. But we will never let that happen. Our American ancestors did not shed their blood at Concord and Trenton, Gettysburg and Shiloh, Midway and Normandy, just so that a band of thieves, radicals, and lunatics could come in and loot, pillage our nation. Our heroes died to win, build, and to save, and to build truly a great country, the greatest country ever in the world.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the wrong video. That was just Donald Trump ranting against communism. I'm sorry. Let me find the video I was going to show you. That was just Donald Trump talking against communism. All right. Hold on. Okay. Sorry. That was just Donald Trump, everything he's been saying against communism. But here's my RT report. Sorry.
Next up, a story that has been making a lot of noise, and that's Donald Trump's seemingly latest favorite word, communism. Those keeping count say that he has used it no fewer than 80 times in just the last 2 weeks alone.
Communism, communist menace, communism, communisms. I would be the greatest communist in history. Lenin, essentially communist. You can be loyal to Karl Marx, or you can be loyal to America. You can be a communist, or you can be a patriot. You cannot be both. Miami has been a haven for those fleeing communist tyranny in South Africa. And all these talks from the communists, we don't want communists in our country.
One of Donald Trump's favorite activities is pounding the podium about the evils of communism. Ever since the Democratic Socialists of America swept the primary vote here in New York City, Donald Trump has learned that thunderously condemning the so-called Red Menace is a crowd pleaser. So what exactly is communism anyway? The Democratic Socialists of America that swept the recent primary votes here in New York City, where Zohran Mamdani is already the mayor, they're advocates of expanding the welfare state, but not the dictatorship of the proletariat or centralization of the means of production. Now, Americans are abuzz all over the internet arguing about what exactly socialism and communism even mean. However, Donald Trump has settled on a definition that he is effectively opposing. According to Trump, communism is when everyone gets a free house.
Look, I want to get the word out because what's forming is communism in the country. And communism's easy to sell. I would be the greatest communist in history. I'd be right up there with Lenin. I'd be as good as anybody. You've got free rent for the rest of your life. What they don't say is that you'll be living in squalor in 12 months. You've got a free house. Would anybody like to have a free house? We'll take it away from somebody. We'll give it to you. You'll have murders all over the place. Communism's a disaster. It's been proven to be for thousands of years under different names, but same thing.
Now, if you pull up the actual data, Trump isn't very far off the mark. In countries ruled by Marxist-Leninist parties like China, Vietnam, and Cuba, the rate of home ownership among average citizens is pretty high. Whereas in America, where a house and a car and a white picket fence have long been staples of the American dream, here home ownership is sinking. Only 40% of millennial and Gen Z Americans own their own homes. Mortgage loans just don't go out like they used to. The rate of household debt and student debt has rendered them to be a generation of lifelong renters. 89%, almost 9 out of 10 adults under 40, say it is harder to own their own home than it was for their parents' generation. And at this point, only 25% of non-homeowners believe that they will be able to own their own home within the next 5 years. That is the lowest it's ever been since Gallup started collecting this data back in 2013. The World Economic Forum tells us this may actually be the new normal for Western countries.
Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes.
So you can forget about that capitalist dream of owning your own private property.
Housing affordability has declined sharply in recent decades, leading many younger generations to give up on homeownership.
Polls show that economic decline and the overall drop in living standards is causing younger Americans to have a more positive view of socialism and communism. A Fox News poll shows that 38% of Americans believe the country moving towards socialism would be a good thing. Meanwhile, only 54% of Americans, according to a Gallup poll, hold a positive view of capitalism. It seems that the specter of communism is haunting America. No wonder Donald Trump is raising the alarm.
Communism is a loser, and it always will be. Communism is a loser. It always was, and it is right now. It's a big loser. Look at the people that are promoting it. They are not the people you're going to follow. Even while the radicals and extremists attack our incredible history at every turn, they are silent on the miserable history of communism itself, because it never worked. Because communism is the enemy of free people everywhere in the world. Never works. It's the enemy of the Constitution. Above all, it's the enemy of July 4th, 1776. It is the enemy indeed. We will never let the United States become a communist country.
Trump's anti-communism is a winner with the older folks. It reminds them of the good old days when Ronald Reagan was winning the Cold War and capitalism, and America seemed to offer nothing but endless opportunity. But America is stuffed full of young folks who weren't even born during those years. The younger generation has grown up in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, as America has become more and more politically polarized, with living standards slipping overall. So if you tell them that another system is bad because everyone gets a free house, they don't really find that to be a convincing argument. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
Well, it appears that some American politicians are doing their best to keep up with their president's latest trend, but sometimes he gets a bit awkward. Let's take a look at this campaign ad from the U.S. Republican senator representing Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn.
Marsha Blackburn worked with President Trump to take on communist China. As governor, Marsha will fight to protect Tennessee land from Chinese front companies.
It doesn't take a fortune cookie to figure it out. Here in Tennessee, we're going to stop communist China and protect Tennessee land.
But wait, some of the imagery there appears wrong. And it seems that people in the comments agree, even claiming that no person in China had ever heard of fortune cookies. And let's break it down. Now, while trying to show that she would end Chinese communist influence in the U.S., Senator Blackburn actually destroys a Japanese invention. And it is based on an old Japanese rice cracker recipe modified in the U.S. and combined with traditional fortune-telling notes. And that soy sauce there is manufactured by a Japanese company too. And the latest small but important detail, the cat figurine featured at the end of the clip, a traditional image from Japanese folklore. So what is it? Is the U.S. going through a new red scare, or is it just chasing after crumbs?
Yeah. So that was my report. So I've got a number of good questions to answer. Quick reminder, if you'd like me to answer any questions in the second half of the show, the best way to send your questions is to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. 2 people have already done it. I've already sent questions, and I will answer them. And you can also do super chats. We got 3 super chats that have come in. You can also do Rumble rants. If you're on Rumble, one person has sent a Rumble rant. So I will answer questions after we do our roll call. So names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Give me the names and locations. Let's do a roll call. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Sebastian from Stamford, Connecticut. Welcome, Sebastian. Jenny in Cincinnati. Portland, Oregon. Jake Howarth. Samuel from the far east of Russia. Good to see you. We got Fahiko in Montreal. Good to see you, brother. Fahiko, names and locations. Bayonne, New Jersey. Michael is with us. Good to see you. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Anthony in Sacramento is with us. Good to see you, Anthony. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Gabby in Chicago. Woo! Gabby. Cecily in Joliet. Are you coming to the convention in Chicago, Cecily? All right. Jessica is in the house and in Washington, D.C. Good to see you. Fortune cookies were invented right here in Los Angeles, says Bradley. They're very good. Very, 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 very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Amway in India is with us. Good to see you. Arlene in Milwaukee is with us tonight. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. All right. Southern California. Hell yeah. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to start answering questions. First on Buy Me a Coffee. John McCarthy said the Trump administration confiscated all of Max Blumenthal's electronic devices on his way back to the United States after covering Khamenei's funeral. Blumenthal entered Iran exactly as reporters working for establishment media outlets like CNN and MSNBC did, on a press visa granted by the Iranian Foreign Ministry. While in Tehran, he participated in official events alongside those mainstream reporters. When journalists from the mainstream outlets returned to the United States, they were not subjected to the same harassment. Yeah. Well, you know, when I used to go to Iran, I would get searched on the way back, and they would copy my electronic devices. They wouldn't take them, but they would copy them. And that's wrong. I mean, and I stand with Max against that, right? He shouldn't face that kind of harassment. And it's absolutely wrong. I could have gone to Iran for Khamenei's funeral. I did get an invitation. I chose not to go because I have a job at RT, and I'm taking a month off, you know, to do our work, or not a month off, but a week off to do our workshop coming up in Chicago. On top of that, you know, it's legally questionable. I mean, that it's technically illegal to go to Iran right now. You know, unless you have State Department permission. You know, they have been threatening to take people's passports. They obviously did not take Max's passport. You know, we would have heard about that. So, but you know, there is kind of a threat against visiting Iran for legal reasons right now. And I saw they were even trying to pass a law saying that he couldn't come back. He and Kala Walsh, who's a kind of another anti-imperialist journalist, trying to forbid both of them from even returning to the country, which is outrageous. Passport holding U.S. citizens should be able to return into the country. No, I mean, it's bullshit what they've done to Max. I stand with Max. I've been messed with at U.S. Customs before. You know, and when I actually never went, but when I was being trained to visit Cuba, they gave us a very, very good legal training with multiple lawyers about how you handle being detained by U.S. Customs. You know, and I think that's an important thing. I'm not a lawyer here, so I'm not going to give legal advice. But you know, I mean, the training I received was very, very helpful, and that they do all kinds of things to try and intimidate you. But if you are a U.S. citizen with a U.S. passport, they have to let you into the country. They can hold you for a long time, and they can take your electronics, and they can make you miserable. And, you know, I will say the weirdest thing that happened to me is when I was coming back from Iran after I'd been on the ship to Yemen. They put me in a room, and they just left me in the room. And they said to me, "Oh, you're thirsty, aren't you?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, here, have some water." And they put this bottle of water in front of me. And I sat there and I didn't drink the water. And the Iranians specifically told me, they said, "Do not eat or drink anything when you're back in the country." They said, "Do not eat or drink anything." So I sat there, you know, with the water in front of me, and they walked back into the room and they said, "Why didn't you drink the water?" And I didn't say anything. And they shouted up the hall, "He's not drinking the water." Like they were mad I wasn't drinking the water. That is the scariest thing. I don't know what the fuck was in that water. if they put LSD to MK Ultra me, or interrogate me under the influence, or I don't know what was going on, or if they wanted to get my DNA perhaps from the what do you call it, from the bottle, right, to get the DNA off my lips from the bottle, or it was super creepy. They were really upset I was not drinking the water, and they kept saying to me, you can drink the water, just drink this water, just come on, just drink the water, it's fine, you can just drink the water. It was one of the weirdest things. So I don't know what it was, whether, me drinking the water would be them giving them the DNA from my lips, or if there was something in there, like a sedative or something, so that they could interrogate me with me, high on drugs, or I don't know what it was. It was creepy as hell. And the Iranians must have known something about it, because they specifically told me, they said, look, you're going back to the United States. You're on certain lists right now because you were on that ship to Yemen. Do not drink or eat anything when you get to U.S. Customs. They told me that. And I thought, that sounds a little conspiratorial. That sounds a little bit weird. I don't usually drink or eat anything when I go through U.S. Customs. That was so weird. That was one of the weirdest experiences I had. And having read about MK Ultra and all that, I have no idea what was in the water or what that was, but that was really, really scary. The other thing is that, they did search my person at one point when I was coming back into the United States. And that was not a pleasant experience. Let me put it that way. Have, body cavity search, that kind of thing. That's pretty awful. Prisoners are subjected to that. Sometimes prisoners go through that on almost a semi-daily basis, strip searching. But they were, going to make sure I wasn't smuggling money back into the United States. And so they strip searched me, basically. That was a pretty awful experience. But lately, it's been, for a while, they would just search my bags every time. They'd come back in, we're searching your bags. Okay. I will say that when they searched my bags, a couple times they searched my bags, and the guy searching my bags was a police officer, like what do you call it? Customs Border Patrol officer from New Jersey. Very nice, very polite guy. And he just said to me straight up, he said, "Why are we doing this to you? Like, what is this about?" And I said, "I don't know. He said, you're listed here as somebody who has a previous smuggling arrest." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Because I've never been convicted of a crime. I have no criminal record." And he said, "Yeah," he said, "you're in the category, like you have different categories of people, right, that we search their bags. You're searched here as a suspected smuggler." And I said, "That's pretty weird because I'm not a smuggler." And he said, he said, "You don't look like the people that I search for this, right? I search people and you do not look like the kind of person I normally search, and I said, "Well, there you go." So I was listed in the U.S. Customs system as a smuggler. I thought that was a weird one. It was a weird one because I have no criminal record and I've never smuggled, right? It reminds me of, there's that old, there's a really raunchy and silly British comedy from the 1990s, I think. It was called Coupling, right? And it was this British comedy show that they would show on PBS every so often. And there's an episode where, the woman says, the men and the women are always talking about differences between men and women in relationships. And the woman says to, the man, she says, "Why don't men snuggle?" And he says, "For 3 reasons. One, it's illegal. For 2 reasons. 1, it's illegal. And 2, we have less body cavities." And she says, "No, not smuggle, snuggle." I thought that was very funny. Why don't men snuggle, right? Was what it was. But, I don't know. Stupid. Anyway, right. My wife told me I should definitely not tell jokes on these streams. She's right. But anyway, but anyway, all right. So we're going to do, we did John's Buy Me a Coffee. Yeah, we stand with Max Blumenthal. He does great reporting. He does absolutely great reporting. Gray Zone does good stuff, good for him. And he should not face any consequence for going to Iran because, he was doing his job. And just because he has a different editorial perspective than mainstream media, that's not a reason to persecute him. And that kind of harassment goes on. It's selective and it's based on, the U.S. government putting you on a list. So Penny says, this is a sneak peek into the intro to my new book titled The AES Effect, How the Alliance of Sahel States is Awakening Africa. Yeah, Penny does great work. She keeps up very, very, very closely with the Union of Sahel States. Her first book on Ibrahim Traore was tremendous. And so she's working on another book. And so she sent me this paragraph. She said, I'm sending you the book cover on Signal. Oh, you want me to show the book cover? Okay, we'll put the book cover on. All right. All right. It would be better to do this when the book's already available, Penny, because then people can order it right after seeing it. That's generally the way it is. But I guess I'll bring you on to interview you after the book is available. But we'll do this, right? You did buy me a coffee. So yeah. All right. This is the cover of Penny's upcoming book, AES Effect. Right? We got the leaders of the Union of Sahel States on there, and I'll read the paragraph she sent. From bean to brand, the West African plan. In July of 2026, Nigeria will host the Cacao Value Edition Summit themed From Bean to Brand. Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and Cameroon, which together produce roughly 2/3 of the world's cacao, will sign the Abuja Declaration to form a Cacao Value Addition Alliance, allowing them to coordinate policies, promote local processing, set common standards, and negotiate with global buyers as a unified bloc. For 100 years, Africa has set its cacao to the world in sacks and received it back in wrappers, paying at both ends of the transaction, said Senator John Owen Eno, Honorable Minister of State for Industry, which will host the summit. This historic alliance will strengthen Africa's bargaining power in the global cacao industry and end decades of exporting raw cacao beans for a pittance. Great. That's about everything we talked about tonight, about international, Western monopolies dominating the world and everything we talked about, right? And if you want to talk about a government of action that fights for working families, the Union of Sahel States is the real deal. So we're all looking forward to the release of your upcoming book, Penny. So thank you for giving us that preview. Look at that neat title, neat cover she designed. Penny's doing great stuff. And the AES, the Union of Sahel States, is really important. There we go. So now we've got 2 questions from someone, which you can do. You can send anonymous questions. And lately there's been people sending anonymous questions. Sometimes they're trying to get me to say things, and it looks like whoever this anonymous person is once again trying to get me to say things that'll get me in trouble, or trying to pick holes in anti-imperialism or whatever. So here we go. 1, why do conservative anti-Zionists not get about Lenin and why the Tsar had to fall? I read some old Tolstoy, and it seems like the Russian aristocrats generally did hate the Russian people. Like, what was the perception of Russia's czar's elite? And they're out of touch, and they'd have wild sex parties with the French, just like how our leaders have parties with the Israelis. Why is it a lot of Jewish people? Okay, so we'll do that one first. Well, there's a couple layers to that. First, the czar is like the Pope of the Russian Orthodox Church. Okay. And the Russian Orthodox Church considers the death of Tsar Nicholas II to be a martyrdom. That the Bolsheviks did execute him. And that so there's a lot of Russian conservatives that for religious reasons, everything you just said there, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying that's what you said. There's a lot of Russian conservatives that for religious reasons won't go there and will claim that's all Western propaganda, etc. Right there. You have to remember that in Russia, there's you have a lot of people that are communists, but they're not communists in the way Americans are. All right. They're communists in a way that they're proud of the Soviet Union's heritage. There are communists that want to bring the Tsar back. Right. And there was people in the Russian Communist Party that were proposing to bring the Tsar back as a religious head of state. Right. And that doesn't even make any sense to us in the West, but it makes sense in the context of Russia, as Russia is a country that's fighting imperialism, Russia that's proud of its history. And the Russian Orthodox Church, which is a really, really big part of Russia's identity, and the Soviet Union are both a big part of Russia's unique identity, and they don't line up perfectly. But part of the reason that anti-Lenin conservatives might not repeat these things about the Tsar is because they're drawing from Russian Orthodox conservatives who don't believe that for religious reasons. That's one thing. Another thing is that that there's that whole Jacob Schiff thing. It's very clear. There's no question about it. A lot of Jewish folks hated the Tsar because the Tsar was anti-Semitic. Russia was not a good place to be a Jew. There was a lot of pogroms and a lot of anti-Semitism. And Tsar Nicholas II was toppled in February of 1917. Okay? The Bolsheviks did not come to power until October of 1917. And there's a lot of people in the classic trope among these, you know, I don't know what else to call them, and these stupidly anti-Semitic conservatives, right? Is the Russian Revolution was a big conspiracy by Wall Street Jews, and their proof of it is that Jacob Schiff in particular, but a lot of other Jewish organizations funded anti-Tsar groups in Russia. That's true. There's no question about it. Jacob Schiff funded the Russian Freedom Group. Jacob Schiff loaned money to Japan to fight Russia in the Russian-Japanese War. Jacob Schiff did not fund the Bolsheviks, and that's the problem. These people, you know, and it's like that the majority of the rich and powerful in Russia wanted to remove the Tsar because they thought he was incompetent and he was losing World War I. And that when the Tsar was brought down in February, the government that came in afterwards was the provisional government, right, led by Alexander Kerensky. And they continued fighting in World War I. And the Bolsheviks overthrew them. And the Bolsheviks launched revolts against them. The Bolsheviks defended them against the Kornilov reaction, and then they overthrew them. And that's nuanced history. Well, there was these people, they know there was a revolution in Russia, and a bunch of Jewish people were funding groups that didn't like the Tsar. So therefore, all the Russian Revolution was all just a big plot by the Jews. And it's like, it's not that simple. Okay. Like the Tsar and Jewish folks did not get along. No question. Jacob Schiff, Wall Street banker, did not like Jews. Jacob Schiff was a big funder, or did not like the Tsar. Jacob Schiff was a primary financial backer of the World Zionist Organization. And after the Russian Revolution, the World Zionist Organization started trying to deport Jews from Russia to Palestine. And in fact, there was a big effort to try and get Jews out of Russia after the World Zionist Organization and the Bolsheviks were enemies. Now, during the Russian Civil War, they did align with each other because the White Army was slaughtering Jewish villages. So there were some Zionists in Russia that formed militias to protect their villages during the Russian Civil War because the White Army was killing them all. And the Bolsheviks said, hey, we both hate the White Army, and they had an alliance. But Zionism was generally considered to be contrary to Marxism. It wasn't until after the Second World War that there was any sympathy with Zionism among communists, right? Now social democracy is different, right? And that the World Zionist Organization and the British Labour Party had an alliance, and the Israeli Labour Party, that's social democracy, Haganah, it was called. Haganah and social democracy worked together. But communism, if you read Lenin's writings on the national question, Lenin's writings on the Jewish Bund, you read Stalin on the national question, the line was always Zionism is a reactionary trend of the Jewish bourgeoisie. And that furthermore, they not only denounced Zionism, they denounced the Bund, which was socialists who were not Zionists, but were Jewish separatist socialists. They denounced that as well. So just the notion that Wall Street was involved in bringing down the Tsar, that Zionists were involved in opposing the Tsar, makes the Bolsheviks Russian agents of Israel, and that's such a huge leap. Everybody knows. Let's just throw this out there. Everybody knows it is an undisputed fact that the German government gave loads of money to Lenin, right? And that a guy by the name of Alexander Parvus, who was a Russian-born Jewish guy, who was a German member of parliament and a Marxist who had moved to Germany, got elected to the parliament, was running German intelligence, and was an arms dealer and sold weapons to the Ottomans for the Germans. He's the guy who met with Lenin in exile in April of 1917 and made him an offer and said, I'll give you a bunch of money to go back to Russia, and arranged for Lenin's safe passage from Switzerland, which was a neutral country, his safe passage from Switzerland into Russia. And that was a German guy acting on behalf of the German secret police. So, there's just so much wrong with that narrative. Whatever. Okay. Second, why is it a lot of Jewish people after World War II turned on the USSR? And what did the refuseniks have to do with that? Well, I don't know about the refuseniks. That I don't know anything about, right? That I don't know about. My understanding is refuseniks weren't those people who refused to fight in the Israeli military or something. I don't, but the main thing is that after the Second World War, at first the Soviet Union supported Israel, and they shouldn't have. And that was an awful, awful mistake. It was one of the worst things. It was one of the biggest mistakes I think they ever made. Almost immediately after that, they started finding Israeli spies and executing them. And in Czechoslovakia, there was a Israeli spy cell that was hung. They hung them publicly, and Israel called it a pogrom and said it was anti-Semitism. And Czechoslovakia said no, these were spies. Stalin, the secret speech of Khrushchev denouncing Stalin was leaked by Israel. Right. It was, I believe somebody in Poland got a copy of it and they gave it to the Israeli embassy, and the Israeli embassy sent it to America. And, they started finding Israeli spies all over the Soviet Union and hanging them and executing them. And Israel started accusing the Soviet Union of anti-Semitism. And that was in the 1950s. Israel started using all of its mouthpieces to claim that they're anti-Semitic. And actually, Trotskyites were really big in promoting that. Trotsky had played the Jew card against Stalin, even back in the 1920s. He said, oh, you're just persecuting me because I'm Jewish, right? And Bukharin apparently had said something like that. It said, well, Trotsky, you're not loyal to the Russian Revolution. You're loyal to this global Marxist vision. And that's because you spent your whole life in exile and you're not really Russian, right? You're not loyal to Russia. And Trotsky said, oh, you're Jew baiting me. You're saying it's because I'm a Jew, which I don't think is what Bukharin actually said, right? And I think Bukharin himself may have actually been Jewish. I don't know. Was Bukharin Jewish? But I don't think Bukharin actually Jew baited Trotsky. But Trotsky threw a hissy fit and claimed that Bukharin was Jew baiting him, right? And and Trotsky and his followers had played the Stalin is actually anti-Semitic. Yeah, Bukharin was not Jewish. Okay, so but Bukharin allegedly, according to Trotsky, Jew baited Trotsky, right? And Trotsky had played the Stalin doesn't like me because I'm Jewish. Stalin's doing a pogrom. Stalin is Asiatic. Stalin's just like one of the old czars. Trotsky had played that card an endless amount. And so after the Second World War, there was a whole bunch of American propaganda equating the Nazis with the Soviet Union, right? There was the book True Believer by Eric Hoffer. There was George Orwell and his 1984, An Animal Farm. There was Ayn Rand, An Anthem. And there was a whole lot of American propaganda trying to say the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were the same thing. Right. And so Israel went along with that. And they said, oh, and they all hate Jews. And Hannah Arendt actually wrote a book on totalitarianism, where she claimed that anti-Semitism was an essential part of totalitarianism. If you read Hannah Arendt's stuff on totalitarianism, that I think came out during World War II, she maintained that, that hating Jews is a big part of totalitarianism. And, the way in 1984 by George Orwell, the bad guy, the Trotsky figure is Braunstein, right? And Braunstein is they all, it's Goldstein, is Goldstein. And the way they all scream at Goldstein is supposed to be anti-Semitic. It's supposed to be like a pogrom or whatever. So, there's that. Okay. Next. Oh, it's just the same question twice. So, okay. So I don't know about refuseniks, but, and then ultimately in 1967, the Soviet Union recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization and started supporting them. And so at that point, the Soviet Union was thoroughly against Israel. But it's funny. I have up here, I think I have somewhere, I have Gus Hall, a compilation of Gus Hall, leader of the Communist Party USA's, international writings. It's called Imperialism Today. It's a book he wrote, and I have it somewhere. Well, I don't have it there, but I have it somewhere on my bookshelf somewhere. And it has his speech about the 1967 war, and it begins with a very cringe apology for opposing Israel, and has a whole lot of Israel has a right to exist, and and we're not against Jews, we're just against Israel, and we just don't agree with Israel's policies. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. That, to be fair, though, I part of me, I need to acknowledge, and I've heard the stories, right? Bukharin's last wife was Jewish. Did not know that. I've heard the stories that, I would hear this from the older communists, that in the 60s, right? 1967 was when the 67 war happened. And there was a huge mobilization in New York City, especially because there's a lot of Jewish folks in New York City. Huge mobilizations of pro-Israel demonstrations, right? And it was a really big thing. And that was the first time the left really mobilized against Israel, right? Even though there was a huge mobilization of the public to support Israel, and there was a huge anti-Israel mobilization. And it was common, apparently, in 1967, around that time, 67, 68, that if you handed out a leaflet, right? And I heard this story that it was not unheard of, that, the communists would be on the subways of New York City handing out leaflets opposing Israel in the 1967 war. And that an older person would take the leaflet and start crying and just break down and fall to their knees and just start sobbing when they saw the leaflet. Now it was much more common back then. If someone got a leaflet from you they didn't agree with, they'd punch you. But it wasn't that. It was the person would get the leaflet and they would start to read Israel is, doing bad things or whatever. And they would start crying. And usually that person was a Holocaust survivor, and I heard that story, and that happened on multiple occasions. The person had PTSD, right? And they remembered, living in Germany when all of a sudden everyone started hating the Jews, and it was really scary, and it led to them getting, dragged away and having a number put on their arm. And, trauma is a real thing. And in New York City, there were, thousands and thousands of Holocaust survivors during those years. They aren't around anymore because, time passes, people get old and die. But it was not uncommon that people would have explosive emotional reactions to that. The other thing was you had the JDL, right? The Jewish Defense League, which engaged in armed violence against anyone who criticized Israel. And the JDL actually started as just a white supremacist group. They started in Canarsie, a neighborhood in New York City, and they just wanted to prevent black people from moving into the neighborhood. It was a Jewish neighborhood, and they just didn't want black people to move in. So they just burned homes and attacked black people. And then when the 67 war happened, they went around attacking Arab Americans and others who supported Palestine. So, the Palestine issue, let's remember, it wasn't until the 1980s that it was safe to talk about among leftists, right? It was generally off limits for leftists to ever talk about Israel, Palestine. It was just, you couldn't talk about it. It wasn't until, I believe, 1981 was the first national anti-war rally in Washington, D.C. that had a Palestinian speaker. And it was in the 1980s, because of the Islamic Revolution of Iran and because of the kind of Middle East pivot. It was in the 80s that the Middle East became a very big theater and a very big focus of, U.S. foreign policy and such. Then it started to become more acceptable to talk about the Palestinians. But it wasn't until then. It was kind of off limits. And so, these things are complicated. The Communist Party USA in particular was always quite weak on that question. Because there was an, if you read William Z. Foster's History of the Communist Party USA, there's a section celebrating the foundation of Israel, right? Because they had not changed their position yet. And it's all about how the Communist Party is the most pro-Israel party ever. Right? It's awful, right? It's absolutely awful. And, and that even in the 2000s, right? The Communist Party USA, I've heard stories from members of, they would have, Judith LeBlanc would, who's one of their national leaders, who's Native American, would give speeches, and she would both sides the shit out of everything. And we need to listen to the Israeli people, and there's two sides to every story. And, and the Jews are oppressed too. And, the Jewish perspective is not heard. And, the Communist Party USA their position would generally be Israel shouldn't attack its neighbors. And they didn't support, U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, like invading Iraq, but they would bend over backwards to both sides the shit out of Israel. That's not always been the case, and it's probably not the case now because the left, things have changed so much. I'm sure the Communist Party now doesn't do anything like that. But even during the Bush years, the Communist Party was known to, when it came to the Israel stuff, they were just, they got very, very uncomfortable. There's also an incident this incident, and I remember this incident, and it infuriates me, right? So you remember, I don't know if you remember when Muhammad Ali, the boxer, died, right? Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer who converted to Islam, right? When he died, there was a rabbi that spoke at his funeral, Rabbi Michael Lerner, and he gave this speech that was supposed to be so epic, and everyone was sharing it, and like Mint Press News republished it, and it was just, it was so amazing. And I saw that speech, and I was like, fuck that guy, because I remember what he did. Rabbi Michael Lerner, and he's dead, so I guess he died in 2004, so I don't want to speak ill of the dead or whatever, but Rabbi Michael Lerner, he's a Jewish member of DSA. He was the founder of Tikkun magazine, which is a Jewish socialist magazine. It's still around. It's like an interfaith Jewish socialist magazine, right? Rabbi Michael Lerner, I guess he lived in San Francisco, and he demanded to speak at a pro-Palestine demonstration. And they asked him, do you support Israel? He does. He just takes the position that Israel needs to be nicer, right? It's kind of like J Street, right? The liberal Zionist organization, J Street, right? And he did support Israel. It was just, he was like a liberal Zionist. And they wouldn't let him speak. And in 2003, he went on a tirade against the Answer Coalition because they wouldn't let him speak at their rallies, right? And I guess it's on his Wikipedia page, right? In 2003, Lerner criticized the left-wing anti-war organization, the Answer Coalition, for anti-Semitism that he believed was reflected by Answer demonstrations. He later claimed his criticism of the Answer Coalition, of which Lerner's Tikkun community was a member, barred him from speaking at their rallies. Lerner published a column, There is no new anti-Semitism, in which he criticized some Jewish organizations for labeling critics of Israel anti-Semitic. So, like, on the one hand, he accused the Answer Coalition of anti-Semitism. And on the other hand, he claimed that there is, that he went on a tirade and kind of mobilized the Jewish community against the Answer Coalition, because they wouldn't let him speak at rallies because he supported Israel. And he claimed that Answer was anti-Semitic. And so I watched that video going viral of Michael Lerner, and I was just like, this isn't awesome. That guy's a jerk. He if you think Answer is anti-Semitic, give me a break. They are, those are the kind of people that canceled me for allegedly being anti-Semitic. Answer is not anti-Semitic in any conceivable way. But that he played that card against them. That's some nasty stuff. And the other thing I remember in the speech that he gave at Muhammad Ali's funeral, the funniest part was, it was during the 2016 election, right? And he said, our next president of the United States, when she gets elected, Hillary Clinton, yay! And everyone applauded. Look how well that worked out. I remember that. It was awful. And it was and then that was one of the big lines. And when our next president takes office, when she, and I was just like, oh God, it was just this kind of just like woke speech he gave about racism is bad. And, I watched it and everyone's sharing it. Oh, look at this guy. He's so great. I'm like, no, he's not great. This guy's a fucking Zionist who called the Answer Coalition anti-Semitic and mobilized the Jews of the left to go against the Answer Coalition and claimed that Brian Becker was anti-Semitic. Brian Becker is not sensitive enough on Jewish issues. Give me a break. right? I can't even go to an answer rally without, 5 20-year-olds running up to me. I heard on the internet that you're a Nazi, but I guess they're not, sensitive enough, right? I guess, they should make all the Palestine flags half Israel flags. Then it might be okay, right? Give me a break. Yeah, he hated Answer because he hated Farrakhan. That makes sense. And Answer does have, they will let Farrakhan, Answer respects the Nation of Islam, right? That's part of their heritage from Sam Marcy. They support black nationalism. They support all black nationalism. So that's probably what it is. So he allowed Farrakhan. That makes sense. Okay, so he hated Farrakhan. And so because Answer wouldn't boycott Farrakhan, right? Because Answer... Yeah, and Answer, they generally were friendly with the Nation of Islam. That's what it was. Okay, that makes sense. But anyway, enough dirt for tonight. Anyway, enough mudslinging. I don't know. Anyway, okay. And now, what do you think happens in Russia after Putin? They will have another leader that is anti-imperialist, that will represent the economy that Putin has built, that is centered around an anti-imperialist state, that is tied in with anti-imperialist countries. I don't know. Putin's very, very good as a leader. He has a good staff and good team of people around him. And I'm sure there will be other leaders that will emerge, right? I don't know what more to say about it. I will say, many people, I'm hearing it, that people anticipate that so basically what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of bullshit in Western media all of a sudden, trying to set the stage in people's minds for something, right? And so there's a fear, the pro-Russian voices I'm listening to are saying that some of the stories that are appearing in Western media right now, they're not true, right? Things about Russia's economy and things like that, but they're trying to psych the public up for something. So it's not good. Right. And that there might be, who knows? They're already murdering Russian civilians. Right. And so, who knows what might happen. But I am confident that Russian President Putin is doing a great job. And I'm also confident that the next leader that comes in will be somebody who represents the same layer that he represents, that is trusted, that is vetted. So there you go. All right. Excellent show. Thank you, Caleb. Well, thank you. Hey, I'm glad to do what I do. And so did Eastern and West Asian countries undergo similar changes under these principles? I don't know what you mean exactly. I don't really know. Maybe Arlene, if you can just follow up in the chat and maybe explain what you mean, I can try to answer your question. I would like to answer your question, but I don't quite understand what you're getting at there. So if you can just follow up and explain what you mean, I'll try to answer that. There was, neoliberalism, and there's the collapse of the Asian markets in the 1990s. And, one thing that I always say about Asian countries in particular is that one of the biggest lies of neoliberalism is that they will point to South Korea, Singapore, the island of Taiwan, and say, look, they have strong economies and they're capitalist. And that is a huge, huge logical fallacy, because South Korea and Hong Kong and Taiwan have state-run industries. Park Chung-hee used the state and military control to build, POSCO Steel Corporation, to build Samsung, to build Hyundai. South Korea has a very strong economy and it is capitalist, but it's heavily state-managed and state-controlled. And it was built by the state. And the idea that South Korea is an argument for privatize everything is so offensive and ridiculous. It is so offensive and ridiculous. And it just most people don't know. John Stossel, who, made his career, it's kind of weird. He's now, he's a libertarian, but he's in the Fox News universe. But he used to be on, I think, NBC or ABC, one of the main outlets. And he had this edgy TV series in the 90s. And it was are we really number one? And it was questioning whether or not the United States was number one. But it was we need to privatize everything was the message of his thing. And he did segments like this of oh, he went to Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, he could start a store in a matter of hours. And, when he went to a mall, he just met with the owner of the mall and gave him, a couple bucks. And then he had a store. He didn't have to register anything. Hong Kong is more free market than America. Bullshit. Right? Hong Kong was not more free market than America. There was heavy state control of investment. There was national health care provided to the population, but John Stossel made it seem like Hong Kong was just this free market country. And, if you read Lyndon LaRouche's book, The Ugly Truth About Milton Friedman, Milton Friedman spends pages in his writings going on about how Hong Kong is just proof of the greatness of free market capitalism, right? When at the time in the 80s, when Milton Friedman was doing this writing, Hong Kong's economy was based on the drug trade. It was a drug trading hub. It was, largely an underground economy with bribes, it was largely a crime-ridden society. None of his writing acknowledges that. Milton Friedman just says, oh, Hong Kong's success is because of the free market. And on top of that, the government was heavily involved in managing the economy. And so it was crime, the drug trade, and the government running the economy. Hong Kong's success in the 80s is not proof that capitalism is great. And Milton Friedman was he's a Nobel Prize winning economist. He knows that. He's not stupid. He knows that there's, that Hong Kong's economy is state controlled, but his audience doesn't. His audience, full of dumb conservative guys who are just like, yeah, America, capitalism's number one. They're not going to fact check it, right? And he said, look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong's wealthy and Cuba is poor. So therefore, capitalism and privatize everything is the way. And it's like it. And that's what infuriates me. It's not the people that are too stupid, right? It's not the people that are dumb. It's the people that know better but lie. That's what bothers me. And there's a lot of that among American conservatainment, right? You watch Dinesh D'Souza. That's not a dumb man. He went to a good school and all of that. But he does these shows where it's like the reason that the Democrats are the real racists is because they're Marxists, just like Hitler. And during the Civil War, the Democrats supported slavery because they're Marxists, like Karl Marx, and communism is slavery. It's like Karl Marx was a huge supporter of Abraham Lincoln, but his audience doesn't know that. And yes, the Democrats were the real racists. And it's infuriating, right? And it's like, I've studied the history of Marx, and especially Marx's involvement in the U.S. Civil War. Marx wrote for the New York Tribune, but the Democrats were the party of the South, and communism is just like slavery because there's no freedom. So, there we go. The Democrats were the real racists because they're Marxists, and Hitler was a National Socialist, and Hitler is a racist. And it's like, this guy is intelligent. This guy's an intelligent person. He knows that's bullshit, but he doesn't care, and he thinks his audience is stupid, and he's bilking them, right? He's like, oh, look at these stupid suckers in Ohio and Pennsylvania were stupid enough to buy this. Yeah, the Democrats are the real racists. He doesn't have to do any work, right? Hillary's America, that film he made, it's unbelievable, right? And it's like he hates his audience. And having lived in New York City, I used to work. The RT office used to be a couple blocks away from the big News Corporation building, and I would see those people. I would see these like Fox News hosts, in like little diners and stuff like that. I'd be like, wow. And, and then you'd watch them in the morning, and they're talking about country music and how mad they are about a school that has winter break instead of Christmas break and all this. And it's like, you realize they're acting, and they hate their audience. They think their audience are a bunch of dumb suckers, right? And they're laughing at their audience, how stupid my audience is, right? Look at my audience. They're so stupid, they'll buy this. Yeah, the Democrats are the real racists because the Hitler and Karl Marx. And yeah, we can say anything and these dumb people will believe us. There's an element of that. It's very spiritually bad, I will say. Sometimes, people say you can't really say this, but there's something spiritually bad about, when you are lying, when the people who you rely on, right, that you're talking to and supposedly educating, you hate them and you're giving them bad information, laughing at them for believing it. Like, nothing good is going to come out of that. I've read different books over the years. There was a sales book that I read years ago, right, and it talked about a car dealership, right? Well, anyway, I could tell this story another time, but it's just, if you have it in your mind that you're lying to people, if you have it in your mind that you are conning people and scamming people, people will detect it. People will detect it, and they will go the other way. That's one thing. And the people who won't are people that are damaged, right? And that's another sad thing too, right? Is like, so on the one hand, right, generally, a general rule is that if somebody knows that they are being dishonest, if someone knows that they're being deceitful, if someone doesn't believe what they are saying, and they're saying it in a cynical way, people will often be able to pick up on that and detect it. And not trust the person. However, there is a certain type of person that will, and that's a damaged person. A person who has been, maybe they had an abusive parent or an abusive, partner in a relationship, and they smell that deceitfulness in you, right? And it's familiar to them, and it's very sad, right? But largely, most of the public can detect in your body language, in the words you use, in your vocabulary. They can detect if you know you're being deceitful. If you're lying to people, people can pick up on it, right? And then on top of that, those who will trust you, they're trusting you as a way to continue an unhealthy relationship they had with somebody who took advantage of them in another situation. And that's a whole nother can of worms we can get into psychologically. But generally, if you ever do anything coming from the place of, I'm going to lie to these people, I'm going to trick these people, I'm going to deceive these people, you ever do anything with that in your mind, nothing good is going to come out of it. I mean, that's just how these things work. Nothing good is going to come out of it. And the other thing that's interesting is that, and I mean, this is something we could talk about. We could do a whole show on this. Is a lot of times people who do very, very evil things think they're doing the right thing. And that's the only way they can really do it effectively. People who know they're doing wrong often are very, very bad. They're not able to really put their heart into it. That's true. Like, if people really know that what they're doing is not honest, they may try to justify it to themselves, but they're just not able to put their heart into it. People want to believe they're doing the right thing. And it's actually a strong argument in favor of humanity. There's all this stuff about people are evil, people are cruel, and all that. But it's actually true that one of the biggest needs that human beings have is they need to believe they are doing the right thing. They need to believe they're acting morally. I mean, that's actually something that is consistently true. People need to think what they are doing is right. They need to. And when people are in a situation where they have to do things, where they feel compelled to do things that they know are not right, that's not good for them psychologically, right? Addicts, for example, one of the reasons addicts have such an issue is because addicts are people that are doing something they don't want to be doing. It's a loss of self-control. There's something they don't want to do, but they feel compelled to do it. And it hurts them psychologically because imagine if you were constantly doing something that part of you didn't want to be doing, right? It's very hard to do. And, when people have a job, for example, they're morally conflicted about, they don't do a good job of it, right? When people, and there's many examples of this, they talk about this, but people who feel like I'm the bad guy generally do badly. A great example of this, well, I don't know. I mean, in some of my experiences with the legal system, when I used to go to court with police brutality victims and all of that, a lot of the police officers in courtrooms, a lot of those people whose job it is to just be in the courtroom all day and watch people go to jail. And a lot of them are really unhappy people. They're really unpleasant people too, because they're, nobody's happy to see them and they're dealing with situations that are awful. They're also very unhappy people because often they're putting people through unpleasantness. Let me put it that way. And I remember that dealing with the police officers who were like the cops in the Cleveland Justice Center, like the cops who were in that building, they were miserable. I mean, they were absolutely miserable people. They hated their jobs. They didn't like what they were doing. They didn't believe in what they were doing. They saw awful things happening all the time, and they learned to just kind of be cynical, and they were quite miserable people. And there's a lot of people like that. You know, our criminal justice system right now is a system that everybody knows is messed up. I mean, the prison system and all of that. A lot of corrections officers and a lot of people in the legal system. I'm not talking about judges. I'm talking about, you know, bailiffs and, you know, court. A lot of them are really unhappy because they're like, they have to wake up every day and they want to try to look themselves in the mirror and say, I'm doing the right thing, but they know they're not. They know they're not. And it's really hard to convince themselves that they are, you know. And that's just not a good place to be. But anyway, I could ramble about that all night. But anyway, another super chat, or that was that super chat. And then okay, so then there was a Rumble rant that came in. How long can you live without air? I don't know. Ask a biologist. How long can you live without water? Not very long. How long can you live without food? That is the degree to which we are completely dependent on the earth. And your point? Right. What is your point? Like, I mean, is that supposed to somehow debunk what I'm saying about growth being good? You know, the whole history of humanity is reinventing our relationship with nature in order to use resources more efficiently. All right. First, we burned wood, then we burned coal, now we burn gasoline. You know, the development of electricity, like, you know, it's like this idea that we're just going to run out limited resources doesn't take into account that we change the way we interact with our environment. Limits to Growth. All right. The Limits to Growth book that came out, it's a Malthusian book, came out in the 1970s. It said we would run out of oil by the 1990s. And they were right. If we were still acquiring oil in the same way we acquired it in the 1990s, we would have run out by now. But we haven't, right? We now acquire oil through deep sea drilling. We now have hydraulic fracking. And yeah, we're not running out of oil for at least another 70 years, it looks like. You know, but, you know, should we be on oil forever? No. We should find more sustainable, right? We should develop fusion energy. We should go nuclear. I mean, you know, it's like, I'm not saying that, you know, and this is where people, the limited resources thing is just something people are just so debating. No, there has to be limits to growth. There can't be growth. No, there is, right? Look, if you were living 100 years ago, you could say, Caleb, there's only so much wood in the world. No, we got to stop the population from growing because if everyone heats their home with firewood, we're going to deforest the planet and there won't be enough wood and we'll all freeze to death in the winter. Well, and that would be true, except we invented burning coal, and then we invented burning gasoline, and we invented electrical heating. You know, and yeah, you're right that burning wood was not sustainable, right? And for the population to grow the way it has with burning wood to heat our homes was not sustainable. And if you think only in terms of what we can do now, you're right? That, oh, well, we'll eventually just run out of resources, but that's not reality. We're not living as if we'll interact with our environment in the same way, right? I believe, just like we've done before, we will develop higher fuel sources, higher energy sources. We will interact with our environment in a more efficient way. There are different forms of energy that are being developed, and that scarcity mindset, that assumption that there's only so much and we can only ever use resources in the same way we use them now, and we're eventually just going to run out, and there's going to be, you know, that is Malthus. That is a trap. That's not reality. That's the monopolies speaking. The only way they will stay in power is if we stay on oil forever and we just use less and less and less of it, and humanity doesn't grow. But they're not going to be in power forever, right? The coal monopolies, it used to be we ran on coal. I mean, we still have coal power to some degree or other, but you know, I mean, it used to, I mean, there are, you know, I mean, things change. Okay. There are minerals that were worthless, completely worthless. People didn't even bother to put some of them on the, on the charts, but, that were worthless, that now have value because of the computer revolution and all that. And that you cannot assume that humanity will always operate in the same way. And yeah, if we just stopped inventing things, we stopped developing new methods of energy, we stopped innovating. But if you've learned anything from AI, right, we're innovating faster now at a faster pace than we've ever innovated before. Humanity is gaining more knowledge quicker than ever before. Like, that's just, you're not matching the reality of the situation. But you really want to believe this, right? And it's that pessimism, when, a lot of times when I will argue with people about this, I realize I'm not arguing with them on an intellectual level. I'm arguing with them on a spiritual level. That pessimism is really, really important to people. It's a place to hide. It's a place to hide from getting involved in the struggle. It's a place to hide from trying to change things because it's all going to hell and there's too many people and there's too many resources. It's a place to hide. And I'm here to tell you, don't hide from that. Take control, get involved, take control of your future. So there we go. So sign up for the convention in Chicago, August 15th. It's going to be very, very awesome. Hope to see you there. I will drop the form in the chat. It's going to be great. Yeah, we'll be back. I'll probably be back tomorrow night. We're going to have in the Juche study group. So come to Juche study group tomorrow night. Noah's going to lead yet another Juche study class tomorrow. That's been growing great. It'll be the 12th session tomorrow. Can you believe that? We've already had 12 sessions of the Juche study group. So yeah, good times, folks. All right, I'm going to put on the closing music. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everybody. And good night.
A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.